We have a very tight schedule today. We're packing in a lot in a short time. We have the three leading administration officials in our nation on health care who are going to be presenting to all of us today. And it's a real honor that one of them is my cousin, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy, and he will have a great deal to say because, as many of you know, just last week, President Trump issued an executive order on tackling addiction in this country. I don't think it was any accident that that order was issued, because for those of you who follow a little bit of my cousin Bobby's campaign in the presidential election, he made addiction really a forefront of his whole campaign. If you haven't, just Google the YouTube RFK Making America Facing Addiction, and it's all in there. And I was so impressed because I had never seen a presidential candidate devote so much of their time on the road to this issue. And Bobby crisscrossed the country and met with many of the people that you and I know, the kind of thought leaders in addiction treatment, those that are really advocating for better prevention, and finally, what's often left out of this equation, those who are supporting recovery. Because we in this country have an acute care system that continues to treat people that never supports them in terms of their longer-term recovery. And even though this is a chronic illness, we often treat it as an acute episodic illness as opposed to the chronic illness that it is. What was really impressive to me in that documentary, and the words the Secretary has had since then, is the frame that he's putting around this issue. Because he and I both understand what it is to be in recovery, and we know that it's a biopsychosocial illness. And what we've neglected in our treatment paradigm in this country is the psychosocial, but principally the social. We have done a terrific job on the biological. We know what to prescribe. Thank God we've got some not only great treatments in the past, but ones that are coming on board that show great promise. But if you don't combine the mental health and the social health, it's like a three-legged stool. The stool's going to fall down. And what I read into the President's executive order the other day is a commitment to start connecting the dots. All of us in our movement know that we're so fragmented. All of us as advocates advocate for one little diagnosis or one piece of the treatment continuum. We never take a holistic approach. And furthermore, we never connect all the different government agencies that touch someone with these illnesses. We relegate them to one system, and that's the healthcare system. And we've forgotten that these people work and operate within all the housing, and tragically, and too often the case in the criminal justice system and the human services system, and so forth. And what we've never done as a country is think about the true cost of these illnesses across the government. We only look at the cost to the medical spend alone. And until we take a broader aperture of this, we're never going to wrap our arms around all the needs that someone has, such that we can provide them the support that's going to give them the best chance at long-term recovery. Now, in this audience, I see many friends who are there for Amy and I. Furthermore, let me acknowledge my wife, Amy Kennedy, is over here in the back. Amy and I co-founded the Kennedy Forum shortly after I left Congress, and the main goal of the Kennedy Forum was to really push for the full enforcement of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, and to end the double standard in our healthcare system that treated the body but neglected the mind, that treated the physical but neglected the mental. It's hard to believe that that has been the case throughout our history. And frankly, we still need to fight that battle. But as you know, we at the Kennedy Forum have also taken on the Alignment for Progress. And in the Alignment for Progress, we're not only advocating for more access, meaning payers reimburse for care, but we're also advocating for outcomes. God forbid we would ever want to pay for something that actually has better outcomes. And so the idea is the alignment. We have to align the reimbursement to pay for the treatments that actually show the greatest results. Not a rocket science here, but certainly a paradigm shifter if you think about our field. Because all we do today is pay for services. Did you make your therapy? Check. Did you make your check? We don't check how people are actually doing in their lives. Are they stable? Have they been able to hold down a job? Do they have housing? Are they reconnected with their family and friends? Are they in the community? These are things that have never been done in our system. And one hope that I have through Secretary Kennedy's whole initiative is that we can start to connect all of these dots that have been left aside in the whole approach. But the Alignment for Progress today is getting new life. And it's getting new life through the Action for Progress. Because we at the Kennedy Forum have put great, policies forward, and we needed to curate those policies. But at the end of the day, we need to also implement those policies. And I am so grateful that I met an old friend who I reconnected with in Tom Kasumpis, and found out that he has done at his firm HealthSpirit exactly what we want in mental health and addiction. He revolutionized the end-of-life care to ensure that we had a bundled payment model that pays for outcomes for the whole person. And frankly, for those of us who are advocating for addiction and mental illness treatment, we want a bundled payment model. Right. And Tom and his A-team at HealthSpirit have wrapped themselves around our initiative at the Center for Behavioral Health at HealthSpirit. Many of you have been partners for us in that effort, but I just can't thank Tom enough. And I'll just conclude with this. Many of you may wonder, what am I doing up here with someone that I share in common very little with politically? And I'll just answer that by telling you a story. In the years since I left Congress, I took up the fight against commercialized marijuana, and I fought sports betting and the problems with gambling in this country, both of which are new addiction for-profit industries that are really compromising the health and well-being of our fellow Americans. And guess what? Fox News used to love having me on. They used to love having me on because I was like a Democrat that talked against marijuana. They said, we got to have that guy on here. So I went on all the time. But what always surprised me is when I got off Fox News, and of course I would check my phone for messages, my phone lit up. And it was all my fellows in recovery. And I'm thinking to myself, that many people in recovery are watching Fox News? So it was a real awakening for me that we really can't be divisive in this issue. We have to be unified because as much as we have our political disagreements, this is an issue that affects every single American, as the Secretary has said. And I really appreciate the fact that he has taken his role as HHS Secretary to put this on the spotlight. And so with that, I'm going to have my friend Tom Kasumpis invite the Secretary to have a fireside chat around all of these issues and the new initiatives that have just recently been announced. Thank you so much, Tom.
Well, Patrick, before we have the Secretary on, I just want to say one thing. First of all, welcome to all of you. We're all here because of your leadership. So I think we want to give Patrick an extraordinary round of applause. He has brought all of this together for us to focus on and make a difference. And now we're going to welcome the Secretary of Health and Human Services to the stage. Welcome, Secretary Kennedy.
Secretary, good to see you.
Good to see you. Well, thank you so much for being with us at our launch for Action for Progress. This is such an important issue. As you and I have talked, and you've said so many times, mental health, behavioral health, addiction is really one of the most critically important issues in our healthcare today. And it affects families throughout the country, all parts of families, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. It really is so extraordinarily important. And I know how important it is to you, and so we're so grateful for you to spend the time with us today, but also I think to hear from you about why it's important and sort of where we're going with the exciting new announcements that you made just recently around the executive order and the focus that you're taking to address these issues. Talk to us about that.
I mean, it's a raw financial issue. It can be reduced to a raw financial issue. It costs about $92 billion a year in direct costs, about $890 billion a year in indirect costs and lost productivity and cost to our healthcare system, and just collateral damage and all the collateral illnesses. One of the things Patrick and I were talking about backstage is the intensity of use by drug addicts and alcoholics of the healthcare system. That they're in the emergency room all the time. They're also imposing costs on our justice system. They're imposing costs on our foster care system. They overutilize every aspect of the government, and you get them into treatment, and all that stops. And they stop. Patrick was telling me that he went to 17 rehabs, but he was in the emergency room once a week with everything from kidney infections, contusions on his face from falling. And in 15 years that he's been sober, he's never been to an emergency room. And I see that. We all know that that's what happens to addicts. They're negative producers, and they're just, like I said, in economic terms, they're drags on the whole system. But also, just for the morale of our country, we are in what we're facing now in this country is we have the worst health outcomes in the history of the world.
Yes.
We have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. We pay the highest cost, 2 to 3 times what Europeans pay for health care. And we've lost 6 years to Europe in terms of our lifespan over the past 2 decades. We've got the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world, the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world. And then our cancer rates, we're having an epidemic of colorectal cancer now among children. And 10 to 14-year-old children in the last decade, colorectal cancer has grown by 500%.
Wow.
So that is, we have a healthcare crisis, but we also have a mental health crisis. And that's a crisis of loneliness. It's a crisis of despair, of fragmentation, of atomization, of just disconnection from community. And it's being amplified by social media, by cell phones, but also people, when they're disconnected, turn to drugs. They look for something outside of them to fill that lonely hole inside of them. And so, you're seeing record numbers of addictions now. The highest cause of death, overdose, is in children in Americans under 45 years old. And we can't fix that by treating the addiction alone. We have to treat the causes of it. We have to work on prevention. We have to intervene early, but we have to figure out ways to reconnect, particularly our children, with community. Addiction is about isolation. It's a disease of isolation. Addicts end up alone. They burn their relationships. They lose their jobs. They end up in rooms or jails or institutions or dead. And the ultimate solution to that is reconnecting people to community. The response is, there's no coordination between all of the needs and the institutions that that could help with this problem, housing and law enforcement and healthcare and mental health care. There's no coordination, and it's a fee-based service system. So people are, just like the medical system, people have an economic incentive to make sure you don't get well. And that's not saying people who work in these, as caregivers don't want you to be well. Of course they do. But the system itself is designed to keep you sick. Every time you relapse, the rehab makes more money. And the costs go up, and the insurance companies, you think the insurance companies are going to lose money every time you go, but they're looking at the entire cost because they collect friction from those costs. It's like Lloyd's of London, rather have one boat sink a year or 100 boat sinks a year. They'd rather have 100 because then everybody is buying the insurance and the cost of the pie goes up and they're collecting friction on it. Oh, everybody along the way is making money on fee-based services, and ultimately what we have to do at HHS over the next 3 years is do everything we can to switch the model at CMMI and CMS and HRSA and SAMHSA to coordinate response so that somebody is in charge of that addict. Somebody is accountable as he moves through the system. And to move to outcome-based services where people have an incentive to make sure you don't relapse, that there's a strong economic incentive. You get paid one price for treating that individual, and you follow that individual for 3 years, and you're responsible for all the costs. And that will bring down the cost because then people will look. We have lots of evidence-based treatments. We know what works. We're not doing it well because nobody has an incentive to do that, and so there's no accountability.
And we were talking earlier as well, Secretary, about the disconnect between the sort of mental health and the physical health. And as you've just described, the opportunity to make sure that all of that is incorporated in as people are cared for. So it's not just separated, but how does the mental health affect the physical health? And so that there's actually an integration of services.
Yeah, I mean, we need to integrate services. And that's, the Great American Recovery Act is an effort to begin that transition.
Yes.
The Streets program, for example, is based partially on the program that was modeled in the Netherlands. We go out, we bring together law enforcement, we bring together mental health, we bring together counselors, we bring together housing, and we intervene early. We try to get to that addict as soon as, or people with mental health problems as soon as possible. We find them on the street. We move them from crisis to detox, to treatment, to housing, to employment, and ultimately to reconnecting to communities, and to self-sufficiency.
Well, as you can imagine, everyone here is very excited about the Great American Recovery Initiative. And so hearing more about it and understanding how you're taking this on and moving it forward is really extraordinarily important and very exciting to all of us who are concerned about these issues. You had talked about the Streets program. Tell us a little more about Streets. And then sober housing, I think, is also a very important part of this that I know you're very committed to as well.
The Streets program begins with a $100 million program that's going to be distributed to 8 pilot programs, regional pilot programs, where we will coordinate the government. The insurance companies don't have any. The insurance companies have your life with them is very short-lived. You move from one to the other. They're looking at they're looking at the cost over 1 year. And we need to extend that periphery, the periphery of that horizon, so somebody is looking over the cost over 3 years and the entire cost. Right now the fiduciary for addicts is CMS. CMS only is looking at the cost savings to the healthcare system. That's all they're concerned about. And nobody's looking at the cost, the broader cost savings. For example, law enforcement. We're bringing all of these agencies together. We're going to do a study that looks at the entire cost of the addict over the lifetime of the addiction, so that we can demonstrate savings over time to justify the cost of this program. The Streets program, as I said, it's a $100 million program. It builds on a $45 million program that we gave this year for sober housing. And I'm working with Scott Turner at HUD to revolutionize sober housing. I'm a really strong believer in sober housing. I think it's, we need to not just treat the addict and then put him back into the environment that was making him sick or contributing, let me put it this way, contributing to his sick illness. We need to give him some stability or her some stability, and from there they can get employment, they can develop relationships, they can develop independence, and then they can move on. But you need to give them that. Without sober housing, treatment is going to fail.
Yeah. Well, this is a whole new approach, as you're describing, which is also so tremendously important, and the difference between other programs that from the past and sort of where we're going into the future under your leadership. And it really is a very important and exciting part of this. We'd also talked a little bit about integrating some faith-based initiatives within this whole arena to help sort of address these issues. Talk a little bit about your thoughts about that and how that plays a part of this.
Faith-based initiatives work, and that's, they're scientifically proven to work. And they do that by reconnecting us to a community, by expanding the relationships that the addict has. And as I pointed out, addiction is a disease of isolation. Cut off those relationships. And God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religions, through the great books of those religions, through wise people and the prophets, and through nature. Nowhere with such texture and grace and joy as through other human beings. And when we cut off our relationships with other human beings, we lose that access to the divine. And that is a healing power. We are in a spiritual malaise in this country. And we need to give people access to all different ways of reconnecting with something that is higher than themselves. And, I'm reminded of Bill Wilson, who was the founder of the 12-Step movement, he was in a program before he launched AA, which was called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group had 8 steps from which the 12 steps of AA are taken. And those 8 steps were intended to induce a spiritual awakening. And Bill Wilson had that spiritual awakening, and his compulsion to drink, which he'd been fighting for 40 years, suddenly just went away, just miraculously. And he could not imagine that he would ever take a drink again. And then during that 6-month period when he was sober, he put together a deal to buy the primary vendors for the Goodyear and Firestone tire companies. And the deal was going to make him a millionaire and set him up for life. This was the height of the Great Depression, 1932. And he went out to Akron to ink the deal. And somebody else had gone in and stolen the deal from him. And he had put all of his finances in that deal, and he was crushed. He was standing in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel in Akron, and all of a sudden, all of that compulsion to drink came back to him full force. And he was 20 feet away from the lounge, and he could hear the ice clinking in the glasses, and he could hear the laughter of the patrons, and it was screaming at him to come in and get a drink. And on his way to the lounge, he had the central revelation of the 12-step programs, which is he realized the only way that he was going to stay sober is if he helped another alcoholic. And he went, instead of going into the lounge, he went into a phone booth, and he got the yellow pages, and he looked up preachers, the Salvation Army, sanitariums, and hospitals looking for a hopeless alcoholic that he could talk to. And he eventually found Bob Smith, Dr. Bob Smith, who had tried everything to quit drinking, and he was able to persuade Bob Smith to meet with him. And when Bob Smith came into the meeting, he said, "You got 15 minutes," because he'd heard it all. He never heard it from another alcoholic. And they ended up talking all night. And that was the first 12-step meeting. And they both decided the next day the only way they're going to stay sober is to find another alcoholic. So they went to the hospital, and they found a guy who was literally handcuffed to a bed. And he was the third member. And it was this realization that the only way that the spiritual awakening works, but it's just a daily reprieve. And if it's not renewed every day through service to other people, service to other alcoholics, then you'll lose it. And so the 12-step programs teach you, build that muscle of you've got to do something to serve another human being every day of your life. And that's how you teach people to reintegrate in the community, because they get that spiritual and emotional return from service that they then become addicted to. And they begin building relationships and friendships and a sense of community and stability in their lives. And it gives them a purpose in their lives. And that's how you precipitate a spiritual revitalization, a spiritual renaissance, by reaching out to addicts on the street and then giving them stable lives and teaching them the ways to be of service every day.
It's extraordinary. Well, this also is, we have, as a nation, have a crisis around social isolation and loneliness. And I think that adds, as you've just described, to these issues around addiction, et cetera, that are so prevalent. But the opportunity to reach out, as you've described, is extraordinary, and yet so simple to do.
I don't think it's simple, and I get very,
simple in terms of making the effort.
I get very intimidated from talking to Patrick.
Yeah, right.
Encyclopedia.
Simple in
all
that
these
you need to make
ideas
that
about
effort.
how to do it, but they all involve, doing these. A lot. It seems like you've got to change, everything the federal government has been doing forever, and I
Which
think
I think you're able to do. Yeah.
We can do that. We have to. There's a tremendous amount of low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
And but I'm hoping that when I leave this job in 3 years, that we will have changed the trajectory and changed public attitudes toward the treatment of addiction, and at least developed a lot of models in the states for outcome-based care and for integrated care, so that we have something to build on.
Yes, yes, and that's happening so much, as you know, in the physical health arena. So paying for value, incorporating all of those aspects.
That's what we're trying to do across CMS, and we have an amazing team. Dr. Oz is really extraordinary, and he's completely committed to this, as everybody is. Marty McCary and Jay Bhattacharya and all the people who work there are committed to that model.
Yes, well, and the outcomes then will be quite different than they are today, where you're just paying for a service.
Yeah, and that's just a death spiral for us.
Death spiral, yeah.
We have to figure out ways to reconnect our children to a national purpose and to communities and to a sense of purpose in their lives.
Yes.
And create bridges to bring people together again across all these atomized landscapes.
Right. One of the challenges I think that we all face as well is the workforce. The opportunity to provide these services depends on a robust workforce. What are things we can do to support developing a better, a more comprehensive workforce? Because right now we have a lot of shortages and problems that really prevent us from doing certain things. That
you mean in caregiver for addiction specifically?
Yes.
That's part of the funding that we're putting in. We're putting in hundreds of billions of dollars.
Right.
And a lot of it, about $500 billion, will go to the states in block grants, and a lot of that is workforce retention, building a workforce. Oh, it's, that's one of the things that we've got to make an enormous investment in.
Yes. And I know we've talked about this before, but I know personal stories are so important with respect to these issues because people relate. And I know your personal journey has been so extraordinarily important. Could you talk a little bit more about how that's affected where you're thinking and sort of what direction we're going in as a result of what you've experienced personally? Because I know that has really shaped your approach and your values.
Yeah, I mean, I was a heroin addict for 14 years, beginning in my early teens.
Yeah.
And I've been 43 years in recovery. And these, 12-step programs saved my life. It provides all the gravities around which all of my life is oriented. My family, my friendships, the work that I do. I go to meetings every day. I don't have time to go to meetings. I've got 75,000 employees, and I've got a big job, and a lot of people relying on me, and I really don't have time to do it, but I go anyway, no matter what. And when I first came into the program in September of 1983, my first meeting, I asked the guy, how long do you have to keep coming to these meetings? He said, just keep coming till you like it.
Till you like it?
Yeah, and I've been coming 43 years, and I still don't like going to meetings. There's always someplace I'd rather be. I'd rather stay in bed with my wife. I go to an early morning meeting. But I go every day because when I go, the rest of my life works. And for me, it's like brushing my teeth. I don't look forward to brushing my teeth. I don't enjoy the sensation. I do it every day because I don't want to live with the consequence of what happens when I don't do it. And I need to maintain that that spiritual center. Everything that I've done in my life, that I've done out of personal ambition or aspirations or an acquisitive impulse or materialism, has been wormwood and bile. And everything that I've done that is consequential or enduring has come from that spiritual center. And we're all hybrid beings. We're half spiritual and half biological. And a lot of times our biological being doesn't have the best judgment. And the challenge is, how do you walk with one foot in the spiritual world and one in the biological world? And the answer to that is that you have to be disciplined about keeping yourself spiritually fit. Mm-hmm. And so I make a big effort to do that in my own life, but I also gives me an understanding about what that takes to, for an addict who's out there, who's hopeless, mm-hmm. who's irritated, discontent, who's lost all of their touch with their own humanity.
Yes.
And how do you bring them back into society? And how do you give them a chance to fulfill their God-given potential and give them a sense of purpose in their lives? And, it begins with these little steps of giving them the opportunity to be useful to other human beings.
Right. The other area that you've mentioned oftentimes is the importance of prevention, working to make sure that we can prevent these things from developing into the crisis points and crisis response as well. Any thoughts about?
Yeah, this is just like in physical medicine. The longer you wait, the more expensive and the more insurmountable the job becomes. And when we know the kids who are going to become addicts. It's pretty easy to identify them early in life. They're acting out. They're having contact with the criminal justice system. They're getting thrown out of schools. They're getting in fights. And you see these things happening, and we need to start doing the interventions then, when there's still neuroplasticity in their brains, before they've internalized the pathology and lock themselves into behaviors that are very, very difficult to break later on. But we can break them early if we identify them early.
Yes.
And that's one of the issues with one of the aspirations of the Streets program, to find people as early as possible. But also, we're taking a number of other steps to make sure, to identify kids in foster care who need help, and provide them with help before they have encounters with the criminal justice system, with hospitals, with medical care, et cetera.
Right. So as you look ahead, Secretary, thinking about the future, in 5 years in America, what progress do you hope you'll see as a result of this work? How do you see that progress moving forward for our?
Well, I'm hoping that we've at least by then gotten a series of models around the country and in states and cities of things that work, so that we know how to do them. We know how to bring the insurance companies in.
Yes.
We know how to do early intervention. We know how to unify the response across all the different agencies. And we know how to, we've developed ways of following the addict for several years and having somebody take ownership of that addict and say, okay, if I pay you as a rehab, I'm not going to pay you, a daily rate, so that the guy relapses in 2 months and you get paid again. I'm going to pay you one cash disbursement for him for a year, for 2 years, or 3 years.
Yes. And really manage the care.
Right, and you manage all the care.
Yes.
You're responsible for that individual. So if he shows up on your doorstep again, you're going to lose money.
Right, right.
And that gives the economic incentive, the financial incentive to that rehab to do everything in their power to make sure that addict does not return. And when you align the economic incentives with the healthcare outcomes that we're looking for, behavior will change. And that is what we need to do. And that misalignment, is pervasive throughout the healthcare system in this country. And it's why we're paying so much for healthcare, because people are not getting paid to make patients well. Everybody in the system, the insurers, the hospitals, the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, are all making money by keeping us sick. And, those economic incentives filter down and they change human behavior. And we're not going to do anything without, the easiest way to change behavior is to rationalize the financial incentives. Right. Once you do that, everything else is just going to follow naturally. People are going to be incentivized to identify the interventions that actually work.
Yes. And
to implement them. And the companies that don't do that are going to go out of business. And the companies that do are going to stay in business and flourish. All the things that we're chattering about, nothing's going to work unless we realign those incentives. It's absolutely critical that we do that. So, we all have our thinking caps on every day about how do we do that? How do we do models for this? How do we rationalize the economic incentives so that they're aligned with good healthcare policy and good health?
Yeah, well, that's, I think everyone in this room, and certainly the work we're doing for Action for Progress under Patrick's leadership is really focusing and aligned with exactly what you're saying. So we are really grateful to you for your leadership and grateful that you're moving forward with all of these initiatives that we can work with you on and be supportive of, and really transform the mental health addiction care that we provide in this country. It really is an exciting opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tom.
We're about out of time. I just want to say one personal thing at the end. The Secretary and I have known each other for, most of our lives, actually, since we were kids.
At least 50 years.
At least 50 years. When I was talking about doing this, my colleagues said two things. Don't call him Bobby, and don't start talking about Hickory Hill and high-end sports stories. So we stayed away from all of that. But what we didn't talk about and we touched on was, I think, the thing that I find most inspiring by this whole discussion, Secretary, is one, your passion and commitment to transforming the system and providing that leadership. But also, if you think about those who are suffering today, right now, struggling the way that you did in the past, and looking at sort of that time to where you are today as the Secretary of Health, influencing the health of millions of Americans, the inspiration and hope that that provides is beyond description. So thank you for all you're doing, and we look forward to working with you into the future to achieve these extraordinarily important goals that you've aligned.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank all
Let's
of
give
you.
the Secretary a round of applause. You're the best. Give me a hug, man. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Well, that was really an inspiring conversation, important for all of us to think about the future, where we're going, and how we need to get there together in our action for progress. So I'm also now pleased to bring on stage CMS Administrator Dr. Mehmet Oz and Dr. John Sharon, Professor of Psychiatry at UCLA and USC, and the former Director of the LA County Department of Mental Health. So with that, welcome to the stage, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Oz. Thank you.
Please welcome President of the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action, Dr. Kevin Roberts.
Thanks. Thanks for that warm welcome. It's certainly a great day to be in Washington, D.C. I mean, if you're like us at Heritage, you're not tired of winning. And in fact, that's what we're going to celebrate today, 1 year of winning at the Department of Health and Human Services. Not something that often has come out of the mouths of us at Heritage. And the reason we're going to do that is because we have probably the most consequential public health official leading that agency in modern American history. We also have, I should say, great members of the U.S. Senate. I see Senator Tommy Tuberville, who are aiding that agenda. So those of you here in person, those of you who have joined online, welcome. We're in for a great conversation with the gentleman I will now introduce. Secretary Kennedy was confirmed by the Senate about a year ago. He's the 26th Secretary of Health and Human Services. Since then, just as a quick recap, although he and I will get into this in our conversation, he and his team have been hard at work at making America healthy again. They've begun the process of reversing childhood chronic disease, releasing new dietary guidelines that are going to get Americans eating real food again. We at Heritage, my colleague Dr. Jay Richards, who will lead a panel discussion when the Secretary and I have concluded our own discussion, are particularly excited about the Secretary's comments over the weekend about making eating beef great again. This is a revolution in protein. The list continues, ending HHS-funded research that used human fetal tissue from elective abortions, increasing transparency and ensuring scientific integrity across all health agencies, getting petroleum-based synthetic dyes out of our food supply, and overhauling the CDC's childhood immunization recommendations, and so many more. But I am going to let the man himself explain this. And so momentarily, as the Secretary comes to the stage, he and I will then sit down, have a conversation with a handful of questions that I know are top of mind for you. And then, as I mentioned, Jay Richards will lead a wonderful panel discussion to follow. Most importantly, considering the work he's done in his first year as Secretary of the Department, and for a lifetime of great work putting the American people and their needs first, please give a warm welcome to Secretary Bobby Kennedy. You're a popular guy at Heritage, Mr. Secretary. You know, I told my wife and kids last night as we were watching the Super Bowl that sitting down with you, I would feel like I almost have to give a dietary confession based on what I ate during the Super Bowl party. So we won't go into details, but I'm back on plan today. Jay Richards, who heads up our Restoring American Wellness campaign, who I mentioned earlier, is sort of my accountability partner in that regard. So he's looking at me askance. Speaking of the Super Bowl, one of the ads that actually was good was the Mike Tyson ad. I say that as a longtime fan of boxing, growing up watching him and seeing him with that powerful memorial to his sister was really touching. Tell us about that ad and what you hope its impact will be.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the extraordinary support that Heritage has given to me during the transition and afterwards. It's been great, and I want to thank Coach Tuberville for being here too, because he's been one of my best allies in the Senate and is part of the Senate MAHA caucus, and has just been a great friend to me throughout this process. I really value that, Coach, as you know. The ad was done by the MAHA Alliance, which is, there's people in the audience from MAHA, and I actually talked to Bill Arnell and Brett Ratner, who directed the ad, the two of them, and Brett is the same director who did the Melania film. And they said to me that Brett has been, since he was 12 years old, the best friends with Mike Tyson, and both of them knew his story about his battle with obesity and the death of his sister, who died of an obesity-related heart attack when she was 25. And the tears that he sheds in that ad were real. They had a script, they knew his story, and they wrote out a script, and they tried to get him to read it for almost 8 hours, and it was not working, and then they just said, let's let him talk. And that very, very powerful ad is what came out of that, just an outpouring from him, from his heart. But what he was talking about, which is that we need to get off of the dangers of processed food, is real. When I was a kid, we had the healthiest kids in the world in our country. We spent, during my uncle's administration, when I was a 10-year-old boy living in this town, we spent 0 on chronic disease. Today, we spend $4.3 trillion a year. And it is about 40 cents out of every taxpayer dollar that's collected is going to treat diet-induced chronic diseases. And a lot of these diseases can be cured. For example, we were talking about juvenile diabetes. Most cases of juvenile diabetes, you can actually lose the diagnosis by simply changing your diet. And doctors don't know, many doctors don't know how to give that kind of advice. 80% of physicians say they don't feel competent to give nutritional advice because they're learning pharmacology in medical school, and there's a pill for every ill, and we're not focusing on what the causes are and how to prevent them. And if we're going to beat this, that's what we have to do. And the primary culprit is ultra-processed foods, refined carbohydrates. 70% of the food that our kids eat are ultra-processed foods, and it's killing them. And it's a spiritual warfare. It is actually it's a war at scale against cellular activity. It's an assault on our children. And it's much worse than cigarettes. Everybody agrees cigarettes are bad. This is much worse. The costs to our society are existential. 77% of our children can no longer qualify for military service, and most of that is diet related. And we need to change what we're feeding these children, or we're going to lose our country. And so, you know, diabetes rates have gone up now. We're spending almost $1 trillion a year on metabolic dysfunction that is mainly through diabetes. When I was a kid, the average pediatrician would see one case of juvenile diabetes over a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 38% of our teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic, and we know what's causing it. You know, in China, 25 years ago, there was virtually zero diabetes, and today, 51% of the adult population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. Why? Because they opened 20,000 fast food joints, and they allowed the import of American processed food. And they started making it on their own, but mainly it's coming from our country because we subsidize the feedstock for ultra-processed food, and we make it artificially low. So this is not about markets, it's a distortion of the market. And it's a distortion that we're paying for at the outset, and then we're paying for it again with food stamps, and then we're paying for it again with Medicaid, because 78% of the kids on food stamps end up on Medicaid, and we're treating their diabetes. The autism rates have gone from 0.8 in 10,000 in 1970, so less than 1 in 10,000, to 1 in 31 kids today. In California, the numbers are 1 in every 19 kids, 1 in every 12.5 boys. So what are we doing to our children? And the answer to that is we need to start getting them real food, and we need a national movement. And you know, I sense it's happening in this country, that people are beginning to realize that they're being mass poisoned. When I was a kid, 5% of kids were obese. Today it's approaching 20%. And 40% of adults, 75% of adults are obese or overweight. And it's not because Americans suddenly became lazy or indolent or hungry. It's because we're mass poisoning them. And we have now the worst health outcomes. We spend 2 to 3 times what the Europeans are spending per capita on food. And we're 79th in terms of outcome. We have the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world, the highest maternal mortality rate. We've lost 6 years to Europe in terms of longevity in the last 20 years. And it's existential for our country. And we've got to focus on it. We've got to, by the way, it's hurting the farmers too. Because if your whole diet is coming from ultra-processed food, that puts the power of agriculture and food production into the hands of these corporations, these multinational corporations that are on BlackRock and Goldman, et cetera. And it takes power away from the farmers, from the ranchers, from the local producers. And we need to start moving, for all of these good reasons, we need to start moving back to eating real food. And the dietary guidelines, when we got them, I was supposed to publish them my first week in office because they've been prepared by the Biden administration, but they're over 400 pages long. And they were all driven by the same mercantile impulses that put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid. It's not food. It was happening. There was nothing nutritious in that. But it was happening because of agency capture, because USDA and FDA had been captured by the industries that they were supposed to regulate. And the lobbyists for those industries were writing the food, the dietary guidelines, and drawing up the food pyramid. And so Brooke Rollins, the greatest agricultural secretary in my lifetime, understood this, and we talk almost every day on the phone, and we work, we brought the best nutritionists together from the leading universities in our country, about a dozen of the top nutritionists in the world. And we thought it was going to take us about a month, but because of the big knowledge gaps, because the NIH and FDA have not been doing their job, they've not been studying what is the what is the etiology of these diseases? What's actually causing them? And so they worked very hard, and there was blood shed over every recommendation, but we ended up with under 10 pages, I think it's 6 pages. And it's written in plain English, and you can summarize it in 3 words: eat real food. And we took the politics out of it, and we made science-based, gold standard science-based recommendations. And these are recommendations that are going to keep us healthy. And we ended the 50-year war on saturated fats, which was all contrived by Procter & Gamble and the American Heart Association, which was funded by Pepsi and Procter & Gamble. And we developed guidelines that are actually health-based, and people should be eating protein. We took whole milk out of our schools. Whole milk is, the micronutrients of whole milk are designed to contribute to brain development, to physical development, to the functioning of your immune system, to metabolic energy. And we took that away from kids for 2 generations. 2 generations of children would grow up with essentially a kind of malnourishment, of being nutrient starved, of not having their brains fed. And we're going to end that. We've ended it, and we're bringing back whole milk, and we're bringing back meat and chicken and eggs and salmon and all the things that we're supposed to be eating. He said to me the other day, there's a section of the grocery store that says, healthy food or organic food. And I said to him, do you know what they used to call that? Food. And we're bringing back real food.
So you're saying that whole grain Fruit Loops is not a food?
It is not. It's a food-like substance.
Thanks for that response, Mr. Secretary. Look ahead, we're celebrating the achievements of the first year, which you just recounted some of, and thank you for that. What can we expect over the next year, in addition to what I'm sure will be the continued great work by your department? I'm glad that you mentioned our great friend, my great personal friend, Secretary Rollins, who's done a tremendous job at agriculture. And the American people are learning that department, of course, controls a lot of this, and the tag team that the 2 of you have developed is really important for them. But give us a glimpse into your crystal ball for the next year or 2 regarding the agency's priorities.
We're going to continue forcing the frontiers of good food and safe medicines and transparent gold standard science and all of our medications and all of our food. Marty is doing a really good job at FDA at fast-tracking new vegetable dyes. We did 2 more this week, so now we have 6 new ones because we're making it. The industry is working with us on all of these things. And they've been very, very good. And we're going to get rid of all the 9 synthetic petroleum-based food dyes by the end of this year, but we're giving the industry options so that they can, and we also changed the regulations so that if you have vegetable-based dyes in your food, you can call them all natural still. You couldn't do that before. We're trying to make things easy on the industry, and they're working with us. We're focusing a lot this year on affordability and on transparency. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the MFNs, the most favored nations, and you guys all know this. We've been paying 10, 12, 2, 3 times, 10 or 12, 13, 15 times what Europeans pay for the same drug. And President Trump loves to tell this story about his friend who was taking the fat drug, or the fat pill, he calls. But that particular pill was created in a factory in New Jersey. The list price in this country was $1,300. The list price in London was $88. And that's not unusual. Unfortunately, that's the norm. The Europeans were very good at negotiating and said, we're just not going to pay more. And they pay enough so it's still economic for the pharmaceutical companies to give them most of these drugs. There's a lot of drugs that are available here that you can't get in Europe, including a lot of cancer drugs. They just refuse to pay for them. But now, President Trump, who understands the uses of power probably better than any other president in our history, has used tariffs to force the Europeans to raise their drug prices. But he told us three things. He said, I want an MFN, which every president since Clinton has promised. None of them have achieved. He said, in addition to that, and this, MFN, if you think about it, it's not good for the pharmaceutical companies because they're going to have to dramatically lower their prices here. But he said, secondly, I don't want to bankrupt the companies. I want America to still be the center of innovation around the globe. And third, I want them to all reshore their production to this country, which is going to cost them a tremendous amount of money too. So this just seemed like insurmountable, really crazy talk, and there was a long period of time when Dr. Oz and I were not answering our phone at 9 or 10 or 2 o'clock in the morning when the president was calling us because he was very forceful, I would say almost angry, and he wanted to, just breathing down our neck trying to get this done. And we, because of President Trump, we've been able to, at HHS, to assemble this extraordinary caliber of people, personnel who have come into this agency. We've got many people at HHS who are CEOs and founders of multi-billion-dollar companies who walked away from those companies, divested, and came in because they wanted to do something good for our country. One of those is Chris Klomp, and I don't think anybody else could have managed these negotiations like he did. We negotiated with 16 of the 17 pharmaceutical companies. We brought them all to the table, and now we have agreements with all of them, and we are now going from paying the highest price in the world to paying the lowest. Whatever the lowest cost in Europe is going to Europeans pay, we will pay, and in some cases even lower. And we were able to do that in a way, using the tariffs and President Trump's personal intervention. We were able to get the European nations to raise their drug prices, which of course none of them wanted to do. It's very unpopular. But he was able to do that, and the industry, when we made the announcements, instead of losing huge amounts of money, gained $1.3 trillion in stock value. Because there's certainty out there, they're going to be able to sell a lot more of these pharmaceuticals, although they're doing it at a tiny fraction of the price, and they're making a lot of it back in Europe. And so that is going to, in terms of affordability, that is going to dramatically change the equation in our country. We're doing other things too, which is we got prior authorization. Another thing that 6 presidents have promised, prior authorizations, a worse experience for most Americans. They go to the doctor says you need a knee surgery, and you cannot get approval for it, authorization from your insurance company for 6 months. And we got all of the 80% of the insurers, the largest company representing 80% of the American population, now agreeing to get rid of all of their prior authorization, except the ones that we agreed to. There's certain procedures, certain spinal surgeries, et cetera, where there's an incentive for doctors and hospitals to give the surgery when they're not needed. So in some cases you need, we want to be able to, Medicaid, Medicare, we want to be able to look and give some approval in the private. And we want the private companies to do that too, to make sure that it's necessary and that it's in the patient's interest. But for everything else, prior authorization is now gone. You will have an answer at point of care. In other words, before you leave that doctor's office, you will know whether your insurance company is going to pay for it. And then we also brought the industry together, 400 tech companies. And this, again, because of the convening power that the president has, to do something that every president has promised to do, which is to get rid of information blocking. The tech companies take your medical records, which you own, and then they won't give you access to them. And now we've got agreements from all of those companies, 400 companies. We got them all in a room, 400 of them. We started with 60, and the 60 biggest, and did the initial deal, and then all the other ones came on board. And now your medical records are going to be available. Everybody's records are going to be available on their cell phone. And this is going to dramatically change, again, the medical experience. If you live in New Jersey, you get hit by a car in Portland, Oregon, you're not going to have to spend the first hour at the hospital filling out a clipboard. You can go in there, the doctor will have your medical records. And also, I'm sure a lot of you have heard stories about people who go to the doctors, and then the doctor gives you a prescription. You look it up on ChatGPT, and the ChatGPT tells you that actually could kill you. And there's so many stories like that out there, that AI is now better at diagnoses than doctors. Even when you bring in a doctor, it degrades the predictive acumen of AI. AI can now diagnose and in many cases prescribe better than physicians, and people now have access to that. The AI will be able to read your entire medical records. And this is important because when you go to that doctor, he's going to know your blood type. He's going to know your allergies. He's going to know, he's going to have access to years of medical records and know what your history is. But most doctors now are owned by corporations. They're owned by the hospitals, or they're owned by, hospital systems or insurers. And they have, typically they're given about 6 minutes per patient. So they don't really have the time to go through your entire medical record. But AI can do that, and that is going to end up saving a lot of lives and giving people more precision and more control over their health. President Trump said to me, I want to make every American the CEO of their own health, help them make their own decisions and make them intelligently, and that's what we're trying to do. And we also are doing transparency. President Trump, in his first term, passed a price transparency legislation, but the Biden administration almost never enforced it. In fact, I've done more enforcement in 1 year than he did in 4 years. And now we've changed the regulations so that every hospital is going to have to comply. Very few post their records. Every hospital will now have to comply, and they will face enormous fines if they don't. And so, if you go to buy a car, and the guy said to you, I'm going to sell you this vehicle, but I'm not going to tell you what the price is till after you buy it.
This is how Congress operates, right?
You would not buy it. You go to a restaurant and the prices are on the menu. Well, healthcare is the only place you're not allowed to do that. You can be a woman in this country and be pregnant for 9 months and not be able to find out, despite making a phone call every day, what it's going to cost you to have that baby. We did it. So we're going to post that, all the price for everything. If you want to know the cheapest MRI in your driving area, you'll be able to find that immediately. And I went through the website, the web page that we've designed. We were really genius. And again, these genius designers have come in from Silicon Valley, and Joe Gebbia, who's been amazing, and designed this website so that you can look at all the hospitals and all the medical centers and all the concierge services in your area. And I looked at it for pregnancy, for having a baby. And I looked at Manhattan and a mile around Manhattan. There are 30 hospitals, and each one has a different price. So the lowest price was $1,300. The highest price was $22,000. And everything in between, $3,000, $5,000, $9,000. And how can you have that kind of price chaos? The only way is because there's no market. And we're going to create now a market where consumers will have a choice, and that will drive down the cost of healthcare. We're also making the insurance companies post what they reimburse and what the provider gets for every procedure and illness. And that is going to dramatically lower prices in this country because it's going to allow big businesses that are negotiating with that. If you're Aetna, you need the business of this, of IBM or Accenture, somebody who has thousands of employees. You need to get that business. He's going to be able to look at what your profits are on every single procedure and use that as bargaining leverage to drive it down. So all of these systemic changes are ultimately going to, I think, very quickly drive down the cost of healthcare in this country and provide transparency and affordability to Americans. I don't think that any president I just can't think of anybody else who could have got this done. It was President Trump's understanding of the uses of power and, how strong the presidency actually is, and how much leverage we have over all of these people, nations, corporations who've been taking advantage of us in the past. And then also, just I think he's probably the most business-friendly president we've had. Maybe George Bush was this business-friendly, but he's very business-friendly, and he admires business people more than anybody. He loves them, but he will not tolerate overreach, and he doesn't care about vested interests, and he doesn't care about offending powerful people. So it's a joy to work for him because he lets me do stuff that I don't think anybody else would ever let me do.
I'll just observe, Mr. Secretary, it's almost as if President Trump's second term being in this year we're celebrating America's 250th anniversary is providential for the American people. And your own leadership has been striking there. It's why it was a heartfelt introduction for me that I do think you are the most consequential public health official, certainly in my lifetime. I would sit here and have this conference. Yep, I think that's true. I'd sit and talk with you for a few hours, and I know you would be kind enough to do that, but I know that your staff believes that you've got something else on your schedule today. Which is hard to believe here at Heritage, but it is Monday in Washington, and you've been very busy. I'm going to ask you, though, just to take a couple minutes, if you don't mind, to speak as a dad to parents in this audience, in person. Our friends at C-SPAN are here, a few dozen media outlets, thousands of people online. What advice do you give us, and this is also Kevin asking, dad to dad, what advice do you give us and families who believe the system has failed them for decades?
Well, I'll go back to what you said about, President Trump's presidency being providential. And I think that too, and I think that it was providential that he lost, or that he was told that he was lost the last time around.
We love you in your role, Mr. Secretary.
I said he was told that he lost. But I think that, the fact that he had 4 years allowed him to put together this, really an extraordinary administration and to do things that he would not have been able to do if he had been allowed to take office last time around. But for me personally, I had 11 brothers and sisters. I had 70 first cousins. And I know what a healthy kid is supposed to look like. And I've seen this generation. I didn't know anybody with diabetes when I was a kid. I didn't know anybody with autism. And I was raised in the center of the movement for rights for people with intellectual disabilities. I worked in Special Olympics when I was 8 years old. And I didn't see these damaged kids, and now I see a whole generation that is damaged, that has autoimmune and neurological injuries, and all of these kids struggling with of health issues, and I know that's not what children are supposed to look like. You know, I have 6 of my 7 kids have allergies, and some of them are deadly anaphylactic allergies, and I didn't know anybody with that food allergy when I was a kid. And out of all those cousins I had, and hundreds of kids that I knew, I just never saw it. And now it's in every classroom. There's EpiPens in every classroom, and nobody's asking, why is this happening? And for 20 years, I was, you know, screaming about this with nobody paying attention. No pediatricians, which is really strange. What happened to the pediatricians? They know, I mean, some of them have been working for 20 years, and they know that kids are not, you know, they're seeing this increase, this influx in all these diseases. And I was censored and shut down. And but I prayed every single day that God would put me in a place where I could fix this. And so for me, when President Trump asked me to join his campaign in August of 2024, it felt providential. It felt like the answer to prayers. And then, you know, he kept his word to me on everything and more. He invited me to be part of his transition team. I'm the first HHS secretary in history that was able to choose all of my agency heads, Marty and Jay and Dr. Oz. That's never happened before. And I think because of that, we have a collegiality and a sense of teamwork. And, you know, we're trying to make it easier for parents to make good choices. We're not telling people what to do. We're not starting a nanny state. If you live in this country, you ought to be able to buy a Coca-Cola if you want one, or eat a Krispy Kreme donut. But we're going to tell you it's not good for you. And allow you to make your own choices. And that's really how democracy is supposed to function. And you know, parents need to be on their guard. Because you know, we were told by the last administration, trust the experts. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. Right? I argued the Monsanto case, and they had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and I had experts from Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, and they're saying 2 opposite things, depending on what, you know, what their bias was. And so, you know, trusting the experts is not a feature of democracy, and it's not a feature of science. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism, not of democracy. So in democracy, we need, you know, my dad told me when I was a kid, people in authority lie. And, you know, the government lies all the time, and it lied to us about the dietary guidelines for 50 years. It lies about everything. It lied about the Vietnam War. It lies about everything. And, you know, we need to understand that. We need to support government, but we also need to have be in a posture eternally of fear, skepticism toward authority. And that's what it means. That's the civic duty of living in a democracy. And I say today it's harder to be a parent than at any time in history, because you're being assaulted by social media and by your kids are, you know, have their cell phones and they have everything available on that cell phone. And they're being told to eat the worst foods. When you go to that checkout counter, you've got just an array of poison there, so that when you're pushing your baby through in the shopping cart, he's reaching out and grabbing the Twinkies, you know, and then crying if he can't keep them. And so it's all, you know, corporations and government have commoditized us. They're taking away our souls, and they're turning us into just eternal consumers. And the stuff that they're selling us is bad for us, almost all bad for us. And so, you know, we need to approach life understanding that and teach our kids that lesson. Yeah, you be skeptical. And these are all lies you're being told, and that you need to make up in a democracy. We have a responsibility that people don't have in other systems. You need to make up your own mind and make good decisions for yourself and your children.
What stirring advice. Thank you. Timeless advice, really timely for us as we celebrate America 250. Secretary, I mean the following very genuinely, not just from the standpoint of being a hospitable host. Thank you. God bless you. On behalf of not just the people here, including my Heritage colleagues, but I can tell you, and you know this, from tens of millions of Americans, for your courage, your moral clarity, your assembly of a great team, you're willing to work for an extremely consequential president. Know that you are in our daily prayers. Go get them.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
August 23rd, 2024, Glendale, Arizona. A moment that reshaped the national conversation on health.
When Robert F. Kennedy Jr. joined forces with Donald J. Trump, it wasn't just politics. It marked the start of a new health freedom movement.
A call to rethink how we care for body, mind, and soul.
Recognizing the urgency and promise of this moment, the Heritage Foundation quickly stepped in, partnering with a growing coalition to challenge the status quo and return health decisions to the American people.
Through our initiative, Restoring American Wellness, we're tackling the chronic health crisis head-on. From food and farming
to childhood vaccine schedules,
to the effect of technology on young minds.
We're committed to building a healthier future for every American.
For every American.
Join us. Be part of the fight to heal this nation.
Together, we can make America healthy again.
Please welcome Jay Richards, Vice President of Social and Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation.
Well, what an honor to follow that, and thank you all for joining us both in person and online. So it's my delight to spend the next few minutes with a distinguished panel talking about this extraordinary first year. As Kevin Roberts said, this week, the first year anniversary that Bobby Kennedy was confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and what a consequential year it has been. So let me just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll get started. First is Tony Lyons, who is the president of MAHA Action and an attorney and the president and publisher of Skyhorse Publishing, an independent publishing house he founded in 2006. Under Tony's leadership, Skyhorse has grown into one of the largest independent publishers in the country, with 23 imprints, a backlist of over 10,000 titles, and 57 New York Times bestsellers. Skyhorse has built a reputation for publishing bold, provocative work across a wide range of subjects, from politics and current events to health, sports, and fiction. And among its authors is one Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose work on environmental and health issues has reached millions of readers. Tony brings to MAHA Action his experience building institutions, challenging conventional narratives, and amplifying voices that deserve to be heard. And we're going to hear from him about the extraordinary coalition behind these works. Next is Hannah Anderson, who is the Director of Healthy America Policy and Senior Director of Policy at America First Policy Institute. Prior to her this stint at AFPI, Hannah served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. She also served as a health policy advisor for the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, advising on prescription drug pricing, commercial health insurance coverage, and other private health programs. Prior to that, she worked in the U.S. House of Representatives, advising on healthcare policy and other domestic policy issues for members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. In addition, she spent 2 years at the Boston Consulting Group in New York City working in their health care practice. Finally is Kim Mack Rosenberg, who is Children's Health Defense's General Counsel. She's an attorney in private practice located in New Jersey and representing clients nationwide on medical freedom issues, as well as healthcare practice management and disputes and insurance coverage issues. She focuses primarily on her services provided to individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. She's been involved in the vaccine choice and health freedom movement for almost 20 years. Kim has testified in state legislatures around the country to retain, restore, and expand religious, medical, and philosophical exemptions to vaccine mandates, and she speaks to groups around the country on issues related to medical freedom. Kim has authored 2 books on vaccines, Vaccine Epidemic and the HPV Vaccine on Trial. And she's also authored a book on autism, The Parents' Autism Sourcebook. Please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So good to be here. And I'm thinking about, Tony, a conversation we probably had just about a year ago. In fact, I feel like it was exactly this week, talking about the prospects for the year to come, and now it's happened. And so talk a little bit, because you've been involved in this work for years, and so people that maybe weren't plugged into the MAHA movement prior to the election might not sort of know how it's composed or what's happened since the election and Bobby's confirmation. So talk a little bit about the MAHA Coalition and what's happened over the last year or so.
Sure, that's a great question. 1 year ago, the MAHA movement was a group of activists in all different areas. Some cared mostly about food, some about drugs, some about vaccines, all kinds of different categories. And what's happened, and at the time, they were just trying to bring these issues to the seat of power, to the government, and trying to be heard. And in the course of the last year, that coalition of MAHA advocates has turned into a real movement. And that movement then includes all of these different groups. And those are sort of subcategories. So we have 5 or 6 different MAHA entities, and they're all joined together now. We're renting space together, and we're working together as a team. And we recognize now that we're not advocates looking from the outside in. We're on the inside now, and we can have a real impact that we didn't have the ability to have over the last 20 years. That now we can speak directly to senior government members, to secretaries, to the entire cabinet. We can get in touch with people. So we don't yell from the outside that something is wrong, something isn't working. We go through the inside and try to affect change. And that's the real difference, that we feel that we're in this sort of middle ground between government and advocacy, where we can negotiate and inform and educate to have better health outcomes in all these different areas.
Terrific. I mean, Hannah, Tony's talking about this movement of activists that has now come together, and it's been amazing to see the sort of transformation over the last 12 months. But you've worked for many years in the policy arena, especially healthcare policy, and the issue that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. highlighted in his famous speech in which he endorsed Donald Trump was this problem of chronic disease. Which anyone that studies this realizes there are just all sorts of sort of perverse incentives in place that create these problems. What kind of incentives or policy levers need to be pulled, do you think, at least primarily, to shift that so that we're dealing more with a health economy rather than a sickness economy, which is what we have now?
And I appreciate the question, and thanks so much for putting this on. We really appreciate it. I think, when I start thinking of how MAHA and MAGA came together, it all came together because they were all centered on patients first. Bobby is so focused on making sure people have good information, and all 3 of us on this, all 4 of us on the panel have thought through, how do we get patients better information about their health? How do we get them more information about the food they're eating, the dyes that are in their foods, and even the vaccines and things that we're putting in our bodies. And MAGA really came, at the end of Trump's term to really focus on how are we getting people the tools they need to be healthy. And you realize these 2 things need to be anchored together, because it's a little bit truly immoral if you're going to tell someone how to be healthy, but you're not going to actually give them any of those tools to get healthy. And so when I think about this in terms of chronic disease, I don't even think about it in the abstract. I actually grew up on many of the safety net programs that we oversaw at HHS. So instead of thinking about it in the abstract, I thought about, what was my experience on CHIP, or CHIPS as we called it in Texas. So, and I think about, when I was on CHIP, my mom would have to leave her hourly wage job, come pick me up from school, sign me out of school, drive me back to the only doctor in the area who would take Medicaid. We would wait into a waiting room for a while, then see the doctor for 2 minutes, and then be told we needed a follow-up. She would drive us back to school, sign us back in, drive back to work, all for free health care, right? And CHIP is a very generous taxpayer-funded program, and that's why it's been bipartisan for so long, but it is by no account free. Because for anyone else doing the math in this room, that's a half a day's wages for someone who is making hourly wages. And so if my mom had better tools, right, she's getting the information of how it means to be healthy for her children, but she doesn't have the tools. She doesn't have the flexibility. And when she goes to her lawmakers and says, I need more tools to actually be healthy, to spend more time at the doctor, she can't get them, because instead it's just be content with your free health care. And so I think really, the next wave of MAGA and MAHA really enmeshing together is how do we give people more tools to be healthy? And I think, again, back to CHIP, what would have been like if that mom had an on-site clinic? So instead of taking 4 hours of work, she had maybe, a lunch break that she could take her kids to and not lose out on a half a day's wages. So I think that's one of the great examples, and what we're really focused on at AFPI and paving the way for making sure that as we tell people how to get healthy, we're not depriving them of the tools to do so.
Yeah, and so, I mean, if people know what they need to do, that's by itself going to change the incentives in the market. Unfortunately, we're dependent upon not knowing, unfortunately, as you said. Kim, you focused on this, what was considered the sort of most controversial subject, maybe in the MAHA portfolio, but the one that I myself feel quite passionately about, and your work in children's health defense on vaccines. What do you think are this kind of key legal impediments that need to be broken down in order to encourage and re-secure accountability and transparency, especially in the vaccine market?
Sure, thank you. And my focus, and I appreciate the shout out to the work that I did in my private practice, my focus is really with CHD now and our legal group. We launched 7 lawsuits last year. We've already filed one this year against the American Academy of Pediatrics under the federal RICO statute. And I think one of the biggest impediments is not necessarily a legal impediment. It's the inertia, I think that's a gentle way of saying it, of the system, and really trying to prop up what is clearly a broken system. We've all addressed it. The Secretary addressed it just a few minutes ago and continues to do that in his work. But the system really is fundamentally broken. The AAP has also sued the Secretary, and there's a lawsuit pending in Boston in federal court regarding that. You hear about that lawsuit on the news. You don't necessarily hear about the RICO lawsuit. And that's an issue, and it's not just an issue for the lawsuit, it's an issue for people getting knowledge generally. Censorship, cherry picking of studies is still a huge, huge problem in this country, and people don't know what they don't know, right? If you're not able to access information readily, you may not know what the healthy choices are to make for your family. And I really believe it is about having the opportunity to make informed choices for your family. But one of the things that was really, I sort of knew it, and a lot of people in this room and watching online probably know it, but many people may not. There was an order in that AAP case in Boston where the judge said that some of the papers he had received from the parties included declarations or affidavits from doctors saying, well, if I have to have a conversation with a patient about vaccines, if they ask me questions about it, I only get 6 or 8 minutes with the patient. If I have to sit there and answer questions, I can't see as many patients. I'm damaged because I can't make as much money. And that's really disturbing that money was the focus versus informed consent and helping their patients navigate that choice.
So Tony, we talked a little bit about the sort of the transition of the movement from an activist movement to an a group of people that can sort of change things here in Washington, D.C. But talk a bit about the pain points. I mean, both of us, I know many times over the last year, something would appear in some particular publication. We thought, okay, this is obviously written to try to fragment the movement. And so could you just sort of talk about some of the pain points and what we need to do as a movement to make sure that we don't become fragmented?
Yeah, that's a great point, that that there have been so many articles written saying that people in the MAHA movement disagree with each other, or that Secretary Kennedy disagrees with Donald Trump. And those seem to me just to be outside efforts to put a wedge between different segments of the MAHA movement or between Secretary Kennedy and the president. Nothing could be farther from the truth. MAHA's strength to a great extent comes from its diversity and comes from its disagreement. So we welcome all different points of view. And that's what's so different from the way the world worked before, that there was just one truth and that was kept in place by censorship and propaganda. And what we have now is real open dialogue. And that's what real science is. You can't have real science without disagreement. So the MAHA movement has all kinds of voices, and we encourage and welcome all different stakeholders. And we've done that all along. And I have meetings set up with manufacturers of pesticides to try to just see what we can do to have some impact there. And we want to meet with everybody, with all different stakeholders. And that, I think, is where we're going to see real progress going forward. Not by just saying that, we know the truth. That's what got us here. That's what got us to, like Bobby Kennedy said, spending 2.5 times what any other country on the planet spends on healthcare and having the worst health outcomes of the 30 industrialized countries. So we need to end that now, and we do that by having real dialogue and debate.
Absolutely. Hannah, amen, yeah, absolutely. And we've been present for this. I mean, at both public and private conferences in which there's sort of genuine debate about some of these things are very complicated. It's very heartening. Hannah, you worked both on the legislative side and on the executive or the administrative side. Can you think of some ways that on the executive side things might be able to move a little more quickly, maybe in the rulemaking process, or are there some things that just absolutely have to be settled by Congress? Because a lot of people outside Washington, D.C. don't realize how much takes place behind the scenes in the sort of rulemaking process. We might notice the sort of shiny executive order, but of course any executive order can be undone with a new president. So it seems there's some things left for Congress. So what do you think needs to be done there?
Yeah, and what a question, what a question. So, I mean, I think I'd first say, like, anything we can do to continue putting the system back into patients first. That's what the president has said. That's what the secretary has said. That's what all of these actions over the last year, which has been, I mean, incredible, incredible work and pace for 1 year, and really realigning patients first. So I think the president's great healthcare plan is a great start to go there. So transparency. What you're talking about is transparency, price transparency, transparency in scientific endeavors. Behind the stage before we came out here, we were talking about, during COVID, we all learned to trust the science and not look for transparency, but that really is a rejection of the truth. And so I know a lot of us in here have a worldview that's incongruent with postmodern thought, where there is no truth. But I think when we talk about transparency, we talk about there is truth and there's truth to find. So I think if there's anything that I would encourage the secretary to continue doing and the president is to continue pursuing transparency, whether that's in gold standard science, whether that's in transparency about what we're eating and the additives. I believe Congress might have to help out with GRAS, so I look forward to that. And then really price transparency. To be honest, I'd ask policymakers to really take it seriously. As y'all know, I mean, Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And like Bobby said, we're the only people in the world who don't know our healthcare prices before we get a service. It's the only part of our GDP that we don't actually know what we're paying for until we get it. I know many of us go to the doctor, and I recently went and they asked me to get a service. And I said, okay, but what's the price? And they said, well, we can't tell you until after you get it. And I said, this could be $80, $800, or $8,000. What do you mean you can't tell me what it's going to be? Right. So, that's certainly one of those things that I'd ask policymakers to really take more seriously, because if the average American has, anywhere between $500 to $800 in medical debt, like that's 33% of Americans with private health insurance hold medical debt. And it's not from $100,000 got hit by a bus claims. These are coming from because they didn't know the cost of what they were going to get before they went and got it. And so when the president's talking about give people their money in the Great American Healthcare Plan, and when the secretary says make patients the CEO, we're talking about moving away from a system that really rewarded the bureaucracy and the corporate capture, and going back to a system that puts patients like you and me back in the driver's seat. This is your healthcare. This is how you take ownership for it. And we're going to make sure the ways that you can pay for it actually line up with that. So I think, the biggest thing Congress could do, I'd really say, is kind of really uncap HSAs. HSAs are a tremendous asset for people. Trump RX, we have a paper coming out at AFPI, hopefully today, showing that Trump RX with an HSA, because you can stack the discounts, is one of the best ways that you can lower your drug prices. Wow. So it's tremendous, because you're talking about giving money back to the person. And it's kind of a wild paradigm shift, and if you're in health policy, to say that the best way to lower people's costs is to not use health insurance. So, kind of a wacky place we're in. But I'd say that, and then really seriously take a look at some of these some of these institutions like ACIP and USPSTF. Yes. Are they really adding value to our preventative health service? I don't know.
Well, now you briefly mentioned GRAS, so generally recognized as safe. So say just a little bit about that, because it's another one of these things that's it radically lacks transparency, in which lots of things have just been sort of waved through. So for non-health policy people, say a little bit about the GRAS.
Yeah, so GRAS is, was originally designed so that like milk wouldn't have to be regulated. Whole milk, something that we've been drinking for eons, doesn't need to go through a complex regulatory scheme at the FDA.
Or salt or baking soda
or salt
or
anything like that. Instead, that process has kind of been co-opted by, I'm trying to think of a way to put this simply, is by some of our food manufacturers to consider certain additives to our food under that same, we call it a loophole. And so that loophole is allowing all sorts of manufactured chemicals to end up in our food and bypassing any type of scientific review of those additives. There's a balance, of course, of not going overboard on regulations, but right now it's virtually unregulated what is going into our food because of the way that this is set up. So we're really looking forward to either Congress or some rulemaking by the FDA.
Even if we didn't regulate these, just the simple fact that most of us don't know what's in our food because of this process, right? Just a simple disclosure.
But that's why I think what MAHA is it's so tremendous, because it's going back to basics. Eat real food. My God. It's incremental. So we're not talking about MAHA as a crash diet, right? We're talking about MAHA as we're going back to basics of what is the food that's good for you. Turns out it's the food that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and really moving away from ultra processed food. Kyle Diamantes from the FDA and I had a nice chat, and I was showing him a book of dietary guidelines. And one of my staff said, wow, this must be from, the 1990s. And I said, this was published in 2019. What are you talking about? Because it's talking about eat foods that are ultra processed because they're less calorie dense. What? drink lots and lots of zero-calorie soda. And, you know, as someone who believes that Diet Coke needs to be grafted onto the updated Diet a MAHA grandfathering.
The
and
Trump
such.
rule.
Yeah. But, you know, it's certainly not good rules to live by of just eating lots and lots of 100-calorie packs
No, it's crazy.
from Nabisco.
Crazy. Well, so Kim, we've talked a lot about what's happening in Washington, D.C., but I know you've done a lot of work in states. And in fact, it's the states that mandate vaccines. People don't realize this. The CDC may recommend, but it's up to the states. Talk a bit about what can be done at the state level, what you've done, and just advance the cause of medical freedom.
Sure, there's a lot that can be done at the state level, and Children's Health Defense is certainly working really adamantly for children and for others who have been impacted by vaccine mandates. We focus primarily on the children, but ultimately the goal is to remove mandates, right? So that people, again, can make a choice like with any other medication. I can choose to take aspirin or whatever, or I can choose not to. And particularly when you tie those mandates to school attendance, that creates an incredibly difficult situation for families. And we saw that. I was living in New York at the time in 2019 when New York State stripped away the religious exemption for families essentially overnight. Horrible things have happened. And each story, there's so many stories, thousands of them, but each one is also uniquely tragic. There have been families who've had to move away from the state, families, you know, where mom or dad crosses the state lines to go to work. Children are, it's a wonderful choice to make to homeschool your children if it is your choice, but if it's forced upon you, it can be very challenging for families as well. So we are fighting in states not only to overall abolish those mandates, but to put in place protections like religious exemptions and real medical exemptions, because in so many cases, they're not real. They're almost impossible to achieve. So we have a case called Doe against Oceanside Free Union School District, where a young woman was removed from school in 2019 with the religious exemption issue. Homeschooling didn't work for that family. They made the difficult decision, they began to vaccinate her, and she's had several adverse reactions to vaccinations. But at the point that we stepped in, she needed one hepatitis B vaccine. That was it. She had 7 separate medical exemptions saying she couldn't get that vaccine, it could kill her. And the district still denied her medical exemption. She even had gone to a walk-in clinic, an urgent care, and they took one look at her and said, we can't vaccinate you, and we'll write something for you. So those cases, we went to court and we got an injunction so that she could go to school again. So she is back in her classroom. But she's one of the lucky ones, right? Not a lot of people get that result. We also have a case that was just filed in December, CHD against McDonald, who is the commissioner of the Department of Health for the state of New York, seeking to restore the religious exemption. And CHD is a plaintiff, and 7 families who each have their unique stories, again, of religious exemption denial are plaintiffs. And we even have a plaintiff who is a junior in high school. She has a sister who's a senior. Under New York state law, they were out of school for years. She got a medical exemption, a temporary medical exemption that was taken away by the district. So she's out of school again. Her sister is 18, she's a senior. The New York law only applies if you're under 18. So her sister is free to go to school. The same unvaccinated, you know, they're both unvaccinated. It really shows the arbitrary and capricious nature of how these exemptions work. So we're fighting that case too, and I think there's been significant changes in law from the Supreme Court, particularly a decision called Mahmoud v. Taylor, which came down last summer, which really impact and change and sort of coalesce the idea of parent rights and the importance of parents' rights. It's not a vaccine-related case, it's related to educational curriculum, but it really has, we believe, broad applicability, so we're excited to see how that applies in this space.
So Mahmoud, of course, was about just the option to be able to opt out of sex education. I know, right? Yeah, right here in Maryland. It would have not have occurred to me that this could have an implication for religious exemptions for vaccines.
Right, but parents' rights is such an important piece
Absolutely.
of the vaccine, vaccine-related choice, because parents want to make the decision, and the Secretary talked about it. We've talked about people having different viewpoints, but it's making the choice that's right for your family and having that choice supported, and also being able to access public or private education if that is your choice.
Yeah, beautiful. So Tony, it's 2026, and that means that we have midterm elections coming up. And so those of us in the policy arena, of course, think a lot about that. But I mean, what do you think is important for the MAHA cause and this sort of constellation of issues, both in terms of appealing to the American voter, but also in terms of unifying the movement here in the next few months before the midterms?
So Secretary Kennedy said when he was up on stage that he prayed for 19 years to have the opportunity to do the work that he's trying to do now, to do what he feels and what I believe and what MAHA really thinks is God's work, that nothing could be more important than the health of our children and then, and then the future of health of all the people in the country. Dr. Oz has said that for each added year in the longevity of people in this country, that adds $3 trillion to the economy. So, those are just insane numbers. And so when you look at that and you look at the team, the coalition that President Trump and Secretary Kennedy have put together, you can see the importance of their work continuing for the full 4 years. And so that's where the midterms really come into play. And so we're here to support that incredible team that's been put into place and, to back that coalition and make sure that they're able to continue doing their work. And that's going to mean following the lead of President Trump when he endorses candidates and then trying to work with those candidates to try to get the best possible outcome for public health, for the issues that MAHA has been backing over the last year. So generally, if you look at Senate candidate Julia Letlow, and President Trump endorsed her, and then one day later we endorsed her and committed to spend $1 million to help her beat Senator Cassidy, and win the election. So, that's going to be our game plan. We've had since multiple talks with Letlow's chief of staff and with other people who work with her, and we found that there really are points of contact with her that are really going to be impressive to the MAHA movement as they get to know her better. One of them would be medical freedom that she feels very strongly on. The other is healthy school lunches, and then grass, but various other things too. So we think there's a really great partnership that we can have with candidates all around the country to help them win, to help preserve this coalition, but also to make them more clear on what the MAHA issues are, what the science is behind them, what the propaganda and censorship in the past has obscured from the public, so that they can then message that better and they can win in their races. So that's going to be our general plan.
Terrific. So Hannah, talk a little bit about this, not just the MAHA coalition, but it's now a MAGA coalition, right? And I think I know the media. I collected these stories for months of there's this sort of presumption that this was an marriage of convenience that was going to fall apart. I mean, what's your sense from your vantage point about the health of this much broader coalition?
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top, it's MAHA is bringing together all the information, right? We're finally getting a clear-eyed view of what is and isn't healthy. And MAGA, at the last end of President Trump's last term, really rolled out this sweeping list of changes to be a patient's first healthcare system. And so I think that's what we're talking about here is when we marry those together, you're finally getting a health system that is putting the patient first. So when we're looking through, what is the next 2 years look like and why the midterms are so important, I can't underscore enough of how much of a paradigm shift it was in healthcare for those two forces to come together. And when we were working on the transition, one of the things that I noticed in all of the old guides that had been written about, what do we do at HHS? We'll have a well-functioning bureaucracy. Like, just get that for a second. The old guide to how to set up HHS that had been kind of passed through the bureaucrats from time to time or over the years, it was a well-functioning bureaucracy. And I'm not neglecting, we should have a well-functioning bureaucracy and one that is obedient to the president and the secretary. But the chief mission of HHS should be making people healthy. And with Secretary Kennedy and President Trump, we actually have an opportunity to do that. So the marriage of the two is so important because we're actually been given a chance. The secretary said, the president lets me do stuff and all the stuff he wants, and I can attest to that. We have a president who is so married to the people that he rode a garbage truck and did a shift at McDonald's because he's committed with the kitchen table math that everyone else is doing to figuring out how we can actually make healthcare better for people and make people healthier. And so this is critical. This is critical. We have to get this right, or else we're going to end up back again with patients last policymakers.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll take some questions from the people in person here in the audience. But Kim, I want to just end with you briefly. Just give us, if you could sort of specify, you had a magic wand, one or two major policy changes or legal changes in this area that you think would make the most difference to American health. What would they be?
Sure. So I think of the things that we work on at CHD in particular, working on abolishing those vaccine mandates, getting choice back for people is incredibly important. We also have an incredible group that focuses on EMR and electromagnetic radiation, and getting the word out to people to understand how disabling EMR can be. And some people have very obvious reactions to it. Some people have less obvious reactions to it. But it's impacting everyone, and it's especially impacting children and their young and developing brains. And there's an increasing body of science showing that that's the case. But that's also working to take back control from the federal government back to the state and local level so that there's more control there over cell towers and other infrastructures like that. And then also we have a team that works with localities and with local groups to challenge those towers and to protect. And people come to that for all different reasons. Some of them come to it for health reasons. Some come because they're concerned their property values are being negatively impacted. And again, this is about what Tony was talking about. It's about bringing people together and having a variety of opinions. But I think just working generally toward part of our mission at CHD, and Hannah talked about this, ending this epidemic of chronic childhood disease. We have all the tools. We have a lot of money in the United States, but we have the sickest kids with the poorest health outcomes in well-developed countries, and that shouldn't be the case. We should have the healthiest babies, the healthiest children, and we need to put aside the broken system, figure out what's wrong, and fix it.
Thank you. All right, we have a few minutes, so have mic runners. If someone show me where the mic is, right here. Yes.
How you doing? My name is Sheila Armstrong. I am the founder of Cooking for Autism. We are based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have a couple of cases. I wanted to know, do y'all have resources for parents? Because I have a couple of cases about the vaccination where we put in for the religious freedom to not have, for our families to not take the vaccination, but the school district still was pushing it for it. So is there a legal law firm, somebody that we can go reach out to?
There is.
You can reach out to me. I can say my email if that's helpful, or are we
Did
putting
you
up the
really want to do
information?
that? It's totally up to you.
No, it's
okay.
It's fine.
Children's
reach out
Health
to me.
Defense.
Children's
Yes.
Health Defense. You can find me online and shoot me an email, and I'll connect with you, Sheila. I'm right down the road from you in Princeton, New Jersey.
Yeah, right nearby. You bet. All right, another question? Yes, right here.
Thanks so much for what you've shared today. I'm curious if there's more that needs to be done with elder care, just knowing that as there's problems on the front end for children's health, there's a lot of challenges for both those who are aging and also those who are caring for those who are aging in terms of costs, fraud, and also burnout. So I'm curious if there's policies you would like to see coming from this administration on that front.
I can take that. Yeah, so you know the ACL, so the Administration for Community Living, which I'm sure you're familiar, recently announced they're going to put out a caregiving challenge. And so the acting administrator over there is really passionate about getting the president's, one of the president's goals was to make sure that seniors can stay in their homes longer. And so that's something that I know Secretary Kennedy and Mary Lazare have really taken to heart, to make sure that seniors who want to be independent can stay and be independent. And so one of that is really making sure we prioritize caregivers. So I look forward to, I know we all look forward to seeing how we can do that, because again, like I think about my grandparents and my parents, and if there is a way to keep them from having to go to a nursing home, if they are able to accommodate and be accommodated at home, I look forward to that.
Yes, next.
Hi, I'm Christy Clark, and I'm a women's health advocate and breast cancer survivor. One of the things that I've noticed traveling around the country is that women's health is really on the back burner. It just really is. So my question is really for the two of y'all, Hannah at America First, and then of course Tony with MAHA. Where do you see the conversations going? Women are always put on the back burner with our health, and with more people surviving things like cancer, but also putting drugs in our system like chemo, that isn't always exactly what we need. Where do you see that movement going?
Can I take that first? And then, so one, thank you, and I'm so impressed. I survived. That is incredible. And one of the things where I would point to where the USPSTF has really failed to do preventative health, and why I think we need new tools and devices to do that, is because I'm sure you're familiar, but like our current recommendations don't take into impact the what's like dense breast tissue, and so the current mammography can't even tell that. So one, that's a failure of so much of what you go to the OBGYN and find out. And then the second is that Congress has had to say to the USPSTF in a bipartisan rider for I think 15 years, please cover these, the mammography for people who are 40, not just at 50. And so when you have the government telling you what is the latest innovation in preventative health, you actually end up being 15 to 20 years behind in preventative health if the tools that you have don't match with the information you have. So I know that at least at AFPI, we're looking forward to pushing out more on things like that in preventative health, but really exciting to see the department prioritize HRT and other kind of therapies for women going through menopause.
Sure. And by the way, there was a terrific event, I think it was in June of 2025, co-sponsored by the MAHA Institute and Heritage, actually at the Willard, about women's health, and amazing sort of unity, and looking forward to another event like that actually this year. So thanks for raising it very much. Okay, where are the mic runners? We have one over here.
Hi, I'm Bill Walters, a chemist. Could you please comment on the enormous amount of money spent in this country on bottled water? Is it worth it?
Not really sure where to go with that, but I would just say, generally bottled water in plastic is, probably not as healthy as bottled water in glass. But, part of the problem with bottled water is that so much of it has glyphosate in it. But it goes along with a lot of the sort of lies and half-truths that have sort of carried sway in the last 20 or 30 years. And, we did the MAHA Super Bowl ad, and that was the Eat Real Food ad, and processed food kills. And I think in the same way, all of these products, that have put plastics into just about everything that we eat or that we're exposed to, all of those things are obviously really bad for human beings. And we can do better. We can be more healthy. And in polling that was done by Tony Fabrizio, we find that 95 to 98% of the public wants healthier food, wants the government to regulate things so that we are not exposed to dangerous chemicals or dangerous microplastics. So, hopefully that answers it.
All right, I think one more.
You talked a lot about physical health, and you mentioned preventative care, but what about mental health? We have one of the biggest mental health crises in our country right now across very many demographics. Why doesn't MAHA, or what's the future for MAHA, those principles to improve mental health?
Yeah, one of the issues there, I think, is, ties in directly with the food pyramid. So, there was incredible progress made after more than 30 years of just a manipulated food pyramid that was controlled by big food, big ag, that was meant to increase revenue, not to increase public health. So the idea that children, for the last generation, were going to school and eating donuts, eating sugary cereals, eating sodas or drinking sodas, is a big part of the mental health crisis that started there. So many kids who are on medications are poisoned when they go to school and then given medications to make up for those poisons. So I think there's a lot of progress that's being made there now, and that the food pyramid being flipped upside down is really the first step in that direction. And that was also a big part of why we did the Super Bowl ad, that we wanted to highlight to the whole country that they were being lied to, and that all of these foods that are advertised at the Super Bowl are unhealthy, that they can kill you, and that if you eat real food like Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy would like you to eat, you will have better lives, healthier lives, and have better mental health.
And if I would add just one thing, because what Tony's saying on over-medicalization is completely true, is we've replaced proper science with over-medicalization. But to your point, I would certainly say MAHA does include addiction. I mean, I don't know if you've ever listened to Secretary Kennedy describe his own journey with addiction. It's 100% rock solid in the middle of MAHA and the MAHA movement.
Absolutely.
And the president had recently signed, I think it was last week or maybe a week and a half ago, a bold new venture on how to treat addiction. But I think, it really needs to, and they're working on prioritizing, where is it that is, a priority to get people out of homelessness and fentanyl and drug addiction? Where is it more appropriate to treat like heavy substance abuse and, maybe that they've gotten addicted to painkillers over the time? So I think they're really working on sorting that out, because we haven't ever had that conversation. But,
SSRIs, the number one side effect is suicide ideation.
Kim, you want to?
And I do think, it goes back to what I said earlier about sort of this broken paradigm of how the medical system works, and it is over-medicalization, and we need to look at the youngest children to start, because a lot of those children are being put on very heavy psychiatric medications, and also multiples of them. And really reworking that system and finding solutions like nutrition that can be extremely helpful in getting them off that merry-go-round of over-medicalization, one medicine after another, add a new medicine here and there, you get a side effect, you take another medication. That we need to take a hard look at that, and people need to understand that there are options, but they can be difficult to access and difficult to maintain sometimes.
Thank you.
No, I agree with you.
All right, well, we have, the person in the back has raised up the end sign, unfortunately. So it's a terrific conversation. Kim and Tony and Hannah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I appreciate the tribal leaders and the members of the Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee who are here today. Your work guides our decisions. This year we mark 70 years of the Indian Health Service, and I'm very proud that my uncle John F. Kennedy, as a freshman senator in 1954, voted to create the Indian Health Service, and it was one of his first votes, and one which he remained proud of his entire career. For 7 decades, the federal government has carried out trust responsibility to provide health care to American Indians and Alaskan Natives. I take that responsibility very seriously. I spent 40 years doing and practicing environmental law, and about 20% of my time was devoted to representing the tribes in treaty negotiations and litigation against the extractive industry, against big polluters. And when I came in here, I made the pledge that I was going to be the best HHS secretary in the history of the office. Tribal leaders at that time told me that HHS needed more consistent and more direct engagement with the tribes. And I agree. Over the past year, I've traveled to reservations, tribal community, and IHS facilities around the country. I'm told that I've made more trips to Indian country than any HHS secretary in history, and I intend to keep up that cadence. I met with patients, providers, elected leaders. I listened to what works and where we're falling short. The Indian Health Service delivers care through federally operated facilities, urban Indian health care programs, and tribally operated systems under self-determination and self-governance agreements. Doctors, nurses, technicians, and administrators show up every day to serve communities that often face long distances and limited resources. My responsibility is to make that system work and to make it stronger. I strengthened tribal leadership inside the department. I created, for the first time in history, a senior advisor role for tribal affairs and appointed Mark Cruz, the Klamath tribe. And so Mark is, I see Mark almost every day. He's in on all the decisions, the major decisions made in this department, representing the interests of the Indian people and the tribal communities in everything that we do. I appointed Dr. Kim Hardwig of the Nez Perce tribe also to a leadership position at IHS. I delegated the authorities of the IHS director to Clayton Fulton of the Cherokee tribe. Tribal leaders should help lead the community systems that serve tribal communities. Today, I want to focus on concrete actions. First, we're going to phase out mercury-containing dental amalgams at IHS facilities. We know from the science, from gold standard science, that mercury in dental fillings is damaging the brains of children, and particularly when they drink hot drinks and off gases. And when I learned that tribal facilities are still doing mercury, the dental facilities are still doing mercury amalgams, I said, I want them out. And I'm very, very happy that the agency was able to comply very quickly. We reviewed the science, the operational impact. We decided to transition to much safer materials. IHS clinics will adopt modern alternatives that protect patients and that align with current standards. Second, we launched the largest hiring initiative in IHS history. Right now, IHS face a 30% deficit in personnel. That shortage strains providers and limits access to care. We conducted a system-wide assessment to identify the most critical staffing gaps across hospitals, clinics, and administrative offices. We built a 2026 hiring plan that targets high-need roles and high-need locations, and we are streamlining recruitment to make sure that we get that personnel out to your communities as quickly as possible. We're going to bring more physicians, nurses, behavioral health professionals, dentists, and support staff into the tribal facilities, and we're going to work to keep them there. Third, we're addressing infrastructure. During my visits, I walked through facilities that badly needed renovation or reconstruction or just replacement. I reviewed a construction backlog that is $8 billion. We allowed that backlog to grow for too long. So this year, I'm planning to direct $1 billion in existing departmental resources starting in fiscal year 2027 and spread across the next few years to priority projects that are ready to move forward. We're going to direct those funds to facilities that need the most. Workforce and infrastructure form the foundation of care. Prevention and long-term health must follow. HHS worked with the Department of Agriculture to update the dietary guidelines for all Americans. We reviewed the guidance to emphasize whole foods, healthy proteins, and healthy fats, including seafood and legumes. Well, when we were doing the guidelines, one of the things that I talked about with the team that was doing them, was the need to get traditional foods back to reservation lands. Right now, the amount of processed, 70% of the food that's eaten is ultra-processed food, and it is poison, and particularly for Native Americans, it is doubly dangerous. Many tribal communities have practiced the principles of traditional foods for millennia, and across Indian countries, tribes are restoring fisheries, expanding bison herds, building hydroponic systems, and operating community food programs. And we intend to do everything we can to support those projects. It was when I went up to Tanawa, which Mark Cruz mentioned in Alaska, we found a greenhouse that had been funded by this department 15 years ago, and it had never been completed. There was piping that was still missing. I think it was about $1 million or $2 million investment. This is a very isolated community that is a 6-hour drive on a dirt road from the nearest large city, and they have a whole winter where they can't get fresh food. And this greenhouse will allow them to grow fresh food there, and we were able to restore the greenhouse. Tribal governments are strengthening food sovereignty and improving nutrition through their own leadership. And our role at HHS is to support them and to help them. We're going to align federal nutrition policy with tribal priorities. We're going to improve coordination across the agencies, USDA, Interior, the BLM, and HHS. We're going to reduce administrative barriers that limit access to food and health programs. We're also confronting behavioral health and addiction, which disproportionately burdens tribal communities, and that challenges many of the other things that we're trying to do in those communities. IHS and SAMHSA are expanding access to treatment and recovery services. We're increasing staffing for behavioral health services. We're supporting sober housing. We're funding, I've seen incredible sober housing projects done in Arizona and many of the other tribal communities across the country, and some of them are role models for what we should be doing nationwide. We're funding culturally grounded recovery programs that the tribes design and operate themselves. As somebody who's worked for 40 years on tribal issues, the concept of sovereignty is at the heart of everything that I do. When tribes lead these programs, they improve outcomes. We've seen that again and again. The tribes can run the programs consistently better than the federal government. We're going to continue supporting these models. The Rural Health Transformation Program also gives us tools to strengthen care in tribal communities. Through this 5-year investment, we're working with states to direct resources where they're needed most. Alaska is integrating traditional healing into clinical settings. Idaho is dedicating funding to its federally recognized tribes. Maine is expanding substance use disorder treatment through tribal providers. Washington State is strengthening workforce development and care coordination for Native families. Federal funding works best when the states coordinate closely with the tribes, and the tribes shape the implementation. We're going to continue pushing for that alignment. 70 years after its founding, the Indian Health Service remains central to the federal trust responsibilities. That responsibility requires action and not rhetoric. We're going to fill the vacancies. We're going to mobilize and modernize facilities. We're going to strengthen prevention. We're going to expand access to behavioral health care. We're going to improve coordination with the tribes at every level of this department. I value your partnership, your candor, and your leadership. I've asked all the tribes whenever I visit them, tell us what we can do. Give us concrete things that we can do, because we want concrete accomplishments at the end of this 4-year term that I can point to for the rest of my life. I value your partnership, and together we're going to continue strengthening the Indian Health Services and improving health outcomes for American Indians and Alaska Natives. Thank you all very, very much.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Welcome back to the show. One of the top issues for American voters is health care. It's why President Trump's embrace of the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, was so crucial to his victory in 2024. In particular, RFK Jr. was a draw for many with his iconoclastic views on the medical industry, which many Americans lost trust in since the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of the overreach there. Yet for many, myself included, Bobby Kennedy's views really do go a little too far. As head of HHS, he has repeatedly cited false and retracted studies to suggest that vaccines cause autism, contributing to a general vaccine skepticism that has resulted in a horrifying measles outbreak in nearly half the country. So my question is, will RFK Jr. and the MAHA movement help the president in the midterms, or is it going to hurt him in the midterms? Here with us now is the absolute best person to discuss this, Jillian Michaels. Jillian, thank you so much for being here. So tell us a little bit about the wins and the losses of the MAHA movement as you see it.
Okay, let's start with the wins. And I think most people can get on board with these. So he rebuilt the food pyramid. And I want you to understand that the food pyramid controls hundreds of billions in subsidy dollars. So Brooke Rollins came out and she said she's going to make 250,000 retailers that provide food to SNAP families carry healthier, more nutritious foods. This is going to impact what our kids eat in public schools. It's going to impact what our military eats. He removed the black box warning for hormone replacement therapy for women, which was one of the most botched studies and has such a huge impact on women's health. That's a massive deal. He's closing the GRAS loophole. So the GRAS loophole is the generally recognized as safe loophole that allowed big food companies to slide in thousands of chemicals into our foods without safety testing. Reevaluating baby formula, removing heavy metals from baby formula, ending regulatory capture so that our government health agencies don't consistently have a revolving door with private industry, like Pfizer, for example, then running over to the FDA, approving a drug and running back over to Pfizer, having stock in the company. So these are all monster wins. Conversations about vaccines are going to be very nuanced. So, for example, you don't appreciate his position there, but what he did do was move vaccines like COVID or hepatitis B, which are very controversial for parents, onto what's called shared decision. So in other words, those vaccines are not mandated for your kid to go to public school, for example, at least on a federal level. But parents can still choose to do it. Another big one that's controversial is going to be fluoride in the water. I would strongly recommend, Utah has banned adding fluoride to the water. I recommend everyone do their homework on this. This is a very nuanced issue. And the fluoride being added to water is not pharmaceutical grade. It's actually toxic waste. Please do your own homework on that one before making a decision. Now, here's what's going to be a big deal. MAHA is very upset about this. This is an executive order that Donald Trump just passed regarding glyphosate. So I believe it was under the Defense Production Act that essentially said Big Ag has immunity for glyphosate, and glyphosate is known to cause cancer. MAHA is, let's just say, really, really, really upset about this. I'm upset about this, but when you put it in context with all the wins, it's a pretty big loss. That's going to be a big issue. Another big issue, and this is a loser. You're going to lose half the country no matter which way it goes. It's going to be mifepristone, which is the morning after pill. So, of course, a lot of people on the right want him to roll back anything that allows you to send this medication in the mail, the laws that allow this. And then the right is going to go bonkers and have abortion trucks at their voting booth where they can put them again. Sorry to sound so crude, but I mean, we literally saw that at the DNC, and there's no way to win that one. You're going to piss off half the country. So that's a really fast and broad rundown. If I could give you one more thing that I forgot that I think a lot of your listeners will appreciate. Former head of HHS, Xavier Becerra, wanted to remove all age restrictions for gender-affirming care. Kennedy is now banning it for children under the age of 18 if any medical institution that does this wants to get Medicare and Medicaid funds. So a lot to think about. Sorry for that rant.
No, I think that's so brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining that, Jillian. It's so interesting to me the way you point out that this question of birth control is one that it does really divide the country. But to me, the MAHA movement is much more on that kind of libertarian side of things, the kind of, you know, I'm in charge of my body and what goes into it, which would mean that it was more kind of on the pro-choice side of things. No, I mean, is the MAHA movement itself split between pro-choice and pro-life, or does it lean more left on the question of abortion? What would you say?
Gosh, I honestly think it is split. It really hasn't been an integral issue for MAHA, but it is going to be an integral issue for the midterms, and it directly impacts Kennedy and the role he plays in the administration. So regardless of what MAHA is focused on, which is going to be things like lowering drug costs and removing prior authorizations for care through your insurance company, this is absolutely going to be a front and center issue, in my opinion.
And you did a great job of laying out the pros and the cons. You're obviously somebody who looks at all the evidence before making a decision. Just give us the prognostication, 2026, is MAHA going to turn out for Trump and for the Republicans or not?
I think they will, but I also think people are realistic about the fact that nothing is perfect and it becomes a conversation of lesser evils. At least that's how I'm approaching it.
So, and in your view, do the pros outweigh the cons with this administration?
Definitely. Unquestionably, they do. But I would be lying to you if I pretended like everything's going as planned. We got everything we wanted. Of course not. But when I look at the alternative, let me just tell you, Kamala Harris didn't even agree to sit down with RFK, which I think was a terrible decision. And having said that, when you look at, again, the prior head of HHS and everything that has gone wrong under former administrations, people are sicker than ever. The country is heavier than ever. Nothing was working. So we're moving in the right direction, albeit at a slower pace than I think people would like, losing very critical battles along the way. But I think overall, MAHA is winning the war.
Jillian Michaels, God bless and protect you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.
So for those that don't know, I'm William Lamberth. I serve as the House Majority Leader for the State House. And if I may, if you're a member of the State House, please just kind of raise your hand right now. Thank y'all for being here today. This is where the hard work gets done. It is an absolute honor to be with you here today to welcome to Tennessee a true champion for healthy America and our children's future. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. Thank you, sir. The volunteer state has always led by example, and nowhere is that more evident in our bold steps to protect our kids' health, safety, and education. Last year, Governor Lee signed into law a groundbreaking measure sponsored by Representative Rebecca Alexander, which is the father of two teenagers was particularly special to me, and I was a co-sponsor. But beginning this school year, Tennessee classrooms are phone-free zones during instruction times. Thank you. There are obviously exceptions for medical needs and emergencies, but we've seen already the toll that screens take on our children. And you're going to hear a lot today about a variety of ways that we can protect our children. But that was one of the most important bills that we passed last year. These can be phenomenal tools, but I'm sure, as the Secretary knows, they can absolutely ruin children's lives and cause a variety of harms to them. So I wanted to highlight that just at the very beginning. And I want to introduce my very dear friend and the Senate Majority Leader, Jack Johnson.
Thank you, Leader Lamberth. Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here to join Governor Lee and a number of my colleagues here from the Tennessee State Senate and the State House to welcome Secretary Kennedy to our great state. I want to thank the Trump administration and the Secretary in particular for focusing on improving the health of our citizens here in Tennessee. We are proud to partner with you and embrace the Make America Healthy Again movement. Tennessee is leading the nation in many ways, and there's a lot of things we can brag about. But when we're doing that, we should also acknowledge areas where we need to do better. And one of those is with regards to our health outcomes. Far too many national surveys rank Tennessee very poorly whenever it comes to infant mortality, obesity, diabetes, and numerous other health metrics. One of the drivers of these negative outcomes is lack of access to quality health care in some of our rural communities. This is why I'm especially excited about our Rural Health Transformation Act, which was recently passed by Congress. Thanks to the efforts of Governor Lee and his team, Tennessee will be receiving over $200 million annually for the next 5 years to help us expand healthcare access and modernize healthcare delivery across the rural parts of our state. Secretary Kennedy, I want you to know how grateful we are that you were instrumental in helping get that legislation passed. And I personally want to thank you and President Trump for partnering with Tennessee to strengthen rural health care and improve the lives of the people that we serve. We look forward to continuing our work together to build a healthier future for our state. It is now my honor to introduce a strong partner in this effort to make Tennessee healthy again, a proven conservative leader. Please join me in welcoming the Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives, Cameron Sexton.
Thank you, Leader. It's great to be here with you. Governor, thank you for this opportunity. First Lady, great to see you here this morning as well. Ms. Secretary, thank you for coming to Tennessee, and thank you for your family and what you have done in your history to help America and what you all have done for public service. So thank you for that as well, for what your family has done. And also thank you for the common sense of just flipping the chart. Sometimes in government, we lose the common sense aspect of it, and they looked at it, and it wasn't a milestone or anything. It was just, we need to flip the chart, and that makes more sense. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, that's wonderful. That's what we need to do. So that's what we are trying to do in our country, in our state. Listen, in our state, we're focused on providing better access, better affordability, more opportunity, as well as making sure that our individuals in Tennessee are healthier. There's many roads to do that. You're going to hear about that today. There's many great things that the Secretary has done to move us in that direction. Let me just say, in rural health care, we're looking at CON reform that we've done for years to limit the barriers, provide more access, to allow more opportunities for healthcare providers, for healthcare facilities to move into those areas to offer services, not have government be a barrier to that access, which is what we have sometimes through CON. We're also looking at putting providers and patients back in charge of their healthcare plan, not the insurance being in charge of your healthcare plan, to provide so that you all can do what you need to do. That's how we make ourselves healthier as well. And finally, I'll say this. One of the things to make health care more affordable and better access in our state is to actually define what a health care insurance policy is. What is a basic policy? And we can go to buy a car insurance, and we can go in and say we want the basic plan for our car insurance. You can't walk in and say I want a basic health care plan, because there is no definition of what that is. If we can do similar things, common sense things, that provide a starting point for us to have these conversations, whether it's about your food, whether it's about your health care policy, whether it's about providing the facilities to get into these markets, then we're going to be ahead of the game, which we are. It's great to be here with you today. Let me just say, it's my job also to introduce a mentor of mine. And listen, he's known me, I won't say for how long, but he's known me for a long time. And I've known him for a long time. He's a great public servant, a great friend to me. And I will always cherish his opportunity to serve along with him, but also to be able to introduce him as our Lieutenant Governor, Randy McNally.
Thank you. I'm tremendously grateful to be here and to get to be with Secretary Kennedy. I think it's a great honor that he has in coming to our state, and I really do appreciate it. I appreciate also your efforts to approve the SNAP waiver that Tennessee, Governor Lee and Tennessee put forward, which will allow parents to make healthy choices, encourage them to make healthy choices as far as the food selection that they have, instead of filling up on carbohydrates and sweets and things like that. But I think that's a great issue that you took care of, and we really do appreciate. I also appreciate your efforts with the Rural Health Care Transformation Act, and I think it'll do a lot to improve the quality and outcomes in rural communities. And I'm hopeful that we can work together. One of the things that rural communities need the most is capital and operating expenses, and I'm hopeful we can work together in providing that in the future. But it's my pleasure, really, to introduce our 50th governor, 50th in number, but surely first in our hearts, along with the First Lady. But we really do appreciate his efforts. He has suffered through a great many difficulties. We've had tornadoes, we've had ice storms, we've had riots, we've had bombings, and just about everything else you can imagine, floods, everything, and he has persevered through those and shown Tennessee's volunteer spirit and Tennessee's greatness. It's an honor for me to introduce Governor Lee.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. This is a great honor for us to have Secretary Kennedy here. Great opportunity for us to talk about something that matters to everyone. I met the Secretary last year. I was at the National Governors Association, a bipartisan meeting of Republican and Democrat governors. And Secretary Kennedy came and to talk about the health of America, a subject that cuts across all lines, that matters to every single person. I had the honor of doing a fireside chat and to lead a conversation with the Secretary in front of that gathering of governors across the country. And it was fascinating to me as we think about what he has done and what his leadership is doing as it relates to the health of our country. We all have known just intuitively over the last 10, 20, 30 years that something has changed in this country. When you think about cases of autism, the number of that really a crisis, or obesity and diabetes, why we have allergies for children, nut allergies that seem to certainly not exist to the levels that they did in decades ago, cancer diagnoses that are really different today than they have been in decades. Something has changed in our country, and someone needed to have the leadership to stand up and ask the real questions and challenge the status quo and find the answers to the questions that we all had of what is changing and why is it changing. Asking the hard questions, elevating the conversation, moving science toward finding out just what it is that we have done as a country that has changed the outcomes of Americans' health. We all also know that what we put in our bodies creates those outcomes. And it is practical common sense to ask the real questions. And I'm grateful that his leadership in this country to make America healthy again is something that matters to every single American. It certainly matters to us in Tennessee. We want to be a great partner. I'm grateful for President Trump and his focus on this. I'm grateful for the leadership that Secretary Kennedy has shown. Cell phone bans have been talked about here, funding whole milk, removing ingredients and dyes from our foods, making sure that our supplemental nutritional assistance program actually provides nutritional food. You know, when sugar is the primary ingredient in a food, it probably ought not to be in a supplemental nutritional assistance program. And we've made those changes all in an effort, and these are steps in the right direction, but they're all in an effort to be a partner with what's happening at the greater federal level in states all across America. This Rural Healthcare Transformation Fund, which is headed up by his office. I've met with Dr. Oz as well a couple of times in the last several months, both in Colorado and D.C., to construct our plan for that transformation in our rural communities. We know that clinicians should be able to practice at the full extent of their scope. We know that certificate of need laws have really held back investment in our state. We want Tennesseans to have greater access to health care right in their communities. And that's a part of what this Rural Healthcare Transformation Fund has done. So there are so many things that are happening that are a result of this man's leadership, and we are really honored to have him here. I'm grateful and honored to have him on stage today. Please welcome Secretary Kennedy.
Thank you all very much. And thanks for welcoming me here today on my first stop on the Take Back America tour. And Governor Lee, thank you for leading the effort to make Tennessee healthy again and for partnering with us to deliver results. You are advancing MAHA legislation that puts prevention and community health first. You've made Tennessee the first state to add FDA-approved non-opioid therapies to Medicaid and extend these same protections to state employee health plans, reducing public dependence on opioids and setting a national standard. Your support for the Rural Health Transformation Agenda outlined in your recent State of the State address reflects a clear commitment to expanding access and improving health outcomes for rural Tennesseans. And I also appreciate your decision to allow former Deputy Director Faith-Based Community Initiatives, Dr. Monty Burks, to come work for me running our faith initiative at HHS. And thank you for all the initiatives that you're pushing on fluoride, on food dyes, on cell phones, all of the MAHA legislation. And I also want to recognize several elected officials who are delivering results for the MAHA agenda: Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, House Speaker Cameron Sexton, Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson, and House Majority Leader William Lamberth. We're all here today because we're facing an existential crisis in our country. When I was a little boy and my uncle was president, we had the best healthcare system in the world, and we had the healthiest people in the world, the healthiest children. And today we have the sickest. We have the highest chronic disease burden of any nation on earth. And you know, Governor Lee was mentioning the autism rates. In 1970, there were studies of, there was a epidemiological study on autism, which is the biggest epidemiological study ever. And it looked at American kids and counted what the percentage was, and it was 0.8 per 10,000. That was the incident rate at that time, and people knew what autism looked like at that time. And today, it's 1 in every 31 kids. In California, it's 1 in every 19, 1 in every 12.5 boys. We are doing something horrible to our children. And nobody's been asking, why is this happening? The diabetes rate when I was a kid the typical pediatrician would see a single case of juvenile diabetes over a 40 or 50-year career. Today, 38% of our teens are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And so 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door is at risk for diabetes or has diabetes. And the cost to this, national security, 77% of our kids cannot qualify for military service. And the financial costs are ruinous. When my uncle was president, we spent 0 on chronic disease in this country, 0. And today we spend $4.3 trillion. 40 cents out of every taxpayer dollar that goes to the federal government is going to treat chronic disease. And we're hurting our country in all these different ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about the things that we're doing first to reduce costs, and then to prevent this disease and to end the chronic disease epidemic. I had a meeting yesterday in my office to look at the progress of our AI initiatives. My agency is now leading the federal government and driving AI into all of our activities. It will transform medicine in this country with its capacity to diagnose and treat and prescribe disease, but it also helps us detect waste, fraud, and abuse. We are applying it right now to Medicare. We're going to save billions of dollars this year. We our Medicaid and Medicare get $100 billion stolen from us every year, and that's money that's not available for the poor and for seniors for whom those programs were designed. And we are now using AI, and its ability to detect fraud is extraordinary. And we're going to do that at the federal level in a couple of months. We're beginning at the state level as well, where we require cooperation from the states. Probably the most transformative thing that we're doing is MFN. We spend 2 or 3 times what European nations spend for health care, and yet we have the worst health. We're 79th in health outcomes. We lead the developed world in infant mortality. We've lost 6 years to Europe in longevity over the past 2 decades. We lead the world in maternal mortality. And many of the other criteria of healthcare, we have the highest chronic disease burden in the world, as I said. And part of the reason for the high costs is drug prices. 70% of pharmaceutical company revenues come from the United States, but we only have 4.2% of the world's population. We pay for the development of the drugs here, we pay for the innovation, and the Europeans are getting a free ride. And I'll give you one example, what my boss calls the fat drug. In the same injection that is made in a factory in New Jersey is sold in this country for $1,300. That's the list price. In England, you can buy it at any pharmacy for $88. We're paying 15 times what they're paying. And this is true for virtually all of our pharmaceuticals. We pay 2, 3, 5, 10, 12 times more than they do. And for many years, President Clinton promised to fix this and couldn't do it. President Biden, President Bush, President Obama, they all promised to fix it, and they got in there, and they figured out it was insurmountable. And I came in, President Trump called me 2 to 3 times my first 6 months in office, 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, and said, "Where are you on MFN?" And he'd say, are you asleep? And I would, yeah, I'm asleep. And he really drove us, and we put together an extraordinary team. We have a lot of, we've been able to attract the caliber of people to HHS like none in history. A lot of my employees came from walked away from billion-dollar corporations that they had started to work for practically nothing for this agency because they want to change things. And we were able to deploy, particularly one guy called Chris Klum, to run a negotiation team, and we were able to use the threat of the tariffs to bring to the table 16 of the 17 pharmaceutical companies that we've now signed agreements with. And we are now going to have the lowest prices in the world. Whatever the lowest price is they're selling anywhere in the world, we will get that price or lower. And those will be available within, I'd say, within 2 weeks on Trump RX. And the Wall Street Journal reason Americans can already get these prices. The Wall Street Journal reported this week that drug prices are down the first time in 30 years. So we're going to see a tremendous impact and tremendous savings to the American consumer. And one of the things that, President Trump not only asked us to do MFN, which was impossible, but he said, I also want them to onshore all of their production. And I want not to end innovation. I don't want to destroy these companies. So this seemed like an impossible task. We were able to succeed in doing that, and the industry is now investing hundreds of billions of dollars in onshoring production here. Lilly is building 6 new plants, already broken ground. Novo Nordisk in North Carolina is building 4 plants. One of Lilly's plants, one of the biggest API plant in this country, maybe in the world. So next time there's a pandemic, we're going to be able to get the feedstocks for these medications. We're also looking at reducing prices through transparency. And during the transition, I was staying at Dr. Oz's house in Palm Beach, and we got a visit one day from former Prime Minister Rudd of Australia. And he, after he was Prime Minister, he was appointed the head of the commission to bring down costs and elevate the quality of health care in Australia. And he said the one thing that he did that made a bigger difference than it, that dramatically changed prices, was transparency. And so we're doing that here in this country. We are, number one, we're doing prior authorization. So then this is going to change the experience of every American who encounters the healthcare system. And this is another thing that presidents have been promising to do for a generation. Nobody's been able to achieve it. We were able to convene the 80 biggest, or 80% of the biggest insurance company, representing 80% of the American people, about 280 million lives. And they've all agreed now to get rid of price transparency, to get rid of prior authorization in all of the procedures that we ask for. There's some procedures that you want prior authorization. We don't want, somebody's getting a spinal surgery, we want to make sure they need it. We want to have some visibility there, but in the rest of them, at the point of care, if you go into a doctor and he tells you you need a knee surgery, before you leave that doctor's office, you'll know whether your insurance company will pay for it. And this is going to... We also convened 400 of the biggest tech companies in this country, and they've all agreed to stop information blocking. This is another promise that's been made repeatedly over the past decade by various presidents. But right now, your health records, which you own, your tech company won't show you. And now we've got an agreement with all of them to make those available to every American so that you're going to have them on your cell phone. That means if you live in New Jersey, you travel to Oregon, you get in an accident, you won't have to sit for an hour with a clipboard before you get medical treatment. Your doctor will be able to access on your cell phone your health records. He'll be able to see your blood type, your allergies. He'll be able to see previous treatments and contraindications that you have, and it's going to save lives. And it's also going to be able to sync that with AI. Oh, today you go to a doctor, 80% of our doctors are now owned by a corporation. And those corporations are telling them you got 6 minutes per patient. But you can miss a lot in 6 minutes, particularly if somebody has a thick sheath of health records, but you'll be able to have access to AI, and you'll be able to check the treatment that your doctor prescribed or the drug you prescribed to see if there's contraindications. This is going to save a lot of lives, and it's going to, you know, President Trump told me, I want to make the American public, every patient, the CEO of their own health care. That you can make good decisions and that you'll have access to your own information. Price transparency during his first term, President Trump passed a law requiring price transparency. It was almost never enforced by the Biden administration. I've done more enforcement actions this year than he did during his 4 years. But now we've also changed the regulations. I started doing it on day one. They're now changed. Every hospital in the country is now going to have to publish their prices clearly, legibly beforehand. If you go to buy a car and the guy says, well, I'm going to sell you the car, but I'm not going to tell you the price till after you bought it, would you buy it? If you go to a restaurant and look at the menu, the prices are there. Healthcare is the only place where you can't see your prices. If you're pregnant in this country, you can go 9 months trying to figure out how much it's going to cost you to have that baby, and you will not be able to do it in many, many hospital systems. And so now you're going to be able to do it. We already have, I looked at the mock-up on the webpage yesterday, and it was extraordinary. It showed, I asked the question, how much does it cost to have a baby within a mile of Manhattan? There were 30 hospitals, and they all have different prices. The lowest price was $1,300. The highest price was $22,000. And everything in between, $9,000, $5,000, $7,000, is complete information, pricing chaos. How does that happen? It happens because there's no marketplace, because they don't have to share it with you, so they can charge you anything that they want. And that's all going to change now. And we're also forcing the insurance companies to publish how much they're compensating the provider for each service, and how much the provider is actually, and how much they're charging the customer, and how much the provider is being paid. That's going to allow large corporations that have a lot of employees to now have a very good bargaining edge with those insurance companies, which is going to drive down costs, as we're creating a market. I'll talk a second about prevention. Speaker Sexton Cameron Sexton talked about flipping the food pyramid. When I came in the first week in office, we were supposed to publish the food pyramid then and the dietary guidelines because they had been prepared by the Biden administration. They were 453 pages long, and they were driven by the same mercantile impulses that had put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid. This is not food. It's a food-like substance. And it was all driven by commerce. It was all driven by the needs and desires of the industry. And so we went in and we got the best nutritionists from the best universities in this country, got a dozen of them, and we locked them in a room. We thought it was going to be a month. It turned out to be about 9 months. And every word in it there was bloodshed over. Because, we were trying to make sure that we had the best science-driven recommendations for the American people. And we now have a food pyramid that, today 70% of the food that our children eat is refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed food, which is killing them. It's just poison. It's giving them all of these chronic diseases, autoimmune diseases, and all kinds of emotional diseases. We now know that that the things that you eat are driving mental illness in this country. And Dr. Pollan up at Harvard has cured schizophrenia using keto diets. There are studies right now that I saw 2 days ago where people lose their bipolar diagnosis by changing their diet. It's not only affecting our physical health, it's affecting our mental health as well. And we're asking people now, eat real food, right? Eat protein. eat fruit, eat vegetables, eat high fiber grains. And like Governor Lee said, this is just common sense. We're trying to deliver common sense and good policy to the American people. And then we launched Operation Stork Speed, which to fix our baby formula. We have the guidelines for baby formula in this country. There's 30 nutrients in baby formula. They were developed 30 years ago, and we have increased our knowledge of the micronutrients that are required to build brains in these babies exponentially since then, and they're not reflected. What we're doing now, we're also looking at contaminants, which are ubiquitous in baby formula. And in April, we're doing a comprehensive look at all the contaminants in baby formula. And we're going to release that report in April. We're doing a lot of other stuff, and I don't want to take up your entire day, but at NIH, we are now going to deliver gold standard science. And that was not happening in the past. And it wasn't happening because of corruption, because of an old boys network, and mainly because we didn't have the guardrails of replication. We didn't require scientists to replicate their studies. And there's all kinds of temptations to cheat if you know you're not going to get caught. And a scientist who works gets a grant, if he comes up with a null hypothesis, in other words, the hypothesis that he was looking for, it does not pan out, he oftentimes cannot get that study published. It's still science. He can't get it published. And so there's a temptation to always find the positive hypothesis, to confirm your hypothesis with your science. And there was a lot of cheating going on because they knew they were never going to get caught. And now our studies are going to be, every study that we send out is going to be replicated. We're going to get good science out of NIH, and our job is not to tell Americans what to eat. It's to tell them what's good for them and to give them good information. If you want to drink a Coca-Cola or eat a Krispy Kreme donut, you live in America, you ought to be able to do that. But we're going to tell you what the cost is. It seems cheap at the grocery store. The long-term cost may not be worth it. And we're going to let you know about that right now. We're restoring rural health care. We're putting $50 billion into rural health care. Nothing like that's ever happened. Right now, over a 5-year period, right now we put out $20 billion for health care a year to rural areas. This will add $10 billion for 5 years. So we're increasing the federal flow of money to rural areas to expand their health care, to rebuild infrastructure, to retain providers. And that is a crisis in rural areas. And I want to thank you for being here today and for your commitment. And these are doctors, associates who are going to go to rural areas and help deliver medicine, help deliver health care to those rural areas. And so it's going to increase the amount of money that goes to rural areas by 1/3 every year for 5 years, and they all get a choice of how to spend that. They can spend it on ways that can fix the systems in those countries, in the counties, and do it permanently. The Rural Health Transformation Fund aligns health policy with outcomes, not intentions, improving care, lowering costs over time, and strengthening rural communities. For a lot of these rural communities, that hospital is not just delivering health care. It's a cultural center, it's an economic driver, it's the best jobs in that community. And when that hospital closes, the communities collapse around them. So we've got to keep them open. And I want to recognize Tennessee for doing their part. Make America healthy again, prohibiting red dye, enacting fluoride transparency, restricting student cell phones, and submitting a SNAP waiver to USDA. By the way, the dietary guidelines are going to transform health or dietary culture in our country, the food culture, because Because we give about $405 million a day to subsidize food programs. And those are school lunch programs, it's the SNAP program, it's the Indian Health Services, it's Head Start, WIC, plus the Pentagon and the VA are paying for millions of meals every day. And those meals now, this is going to transform the food that all of those people eat. And it's going to help the farmers in our country who are producing the real food. We're going to have school-to-farm programs, and people are going to start getting real food, and we're going to drive the markets so that healthy, real food is available and affordable to every American household. We can't medicate our way out of this crisis. We can't subsidize sickness forever. We cannot accept a future where chronic disease is the status quo. A healthy child and a healthy human being has 1,000 dreams. A sick child has only one. And President Trump wants to return to the American dream, to the American people, so that all of us can have 1,000 dreams and pursue them. I want to thank Tennessee for doing its part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We're going to move to a short question and answer portion now from the media. I'm going to bring the microphone to you. You're going to ask your question, and Stephanie's going to call on you now.
Thanks, everyone. When I call on you, if you could please say your first, last name, and outlet, and then if we can keep questions to why we're here today. Jackie?
Jackie.
Hi there. Thanks so much for being here. Should I move so you can see me?
Please, go on.
Great. Hi. Hi, I'm Jackie from the Epic Times, and I have a question for RFK Jr. So do you believe there's a direct link between autism and screen time?
Between autism and screen time. Is there a link?
I've never heard of that.
Because earlier we were talking about the screen time changes in schools. So I was just curious if there's any studies.
I should have announced that I was changing subject matter.
Okay. That's it.
I've never read any study that associates screen time with autism.
Thanks.
Press pool's going to be back here.
Thank you. Secretary Kennedy, thank you. You know, you talked about the work they're doing here in Tennessee, but throughout the country,
Could
whether
you
it's...
say your name and
yes,
your outlet,
apologies.
please?
Johnny Maffey with Fox 17 Nashville. Across the country, the harmful ingredients you talk about in the foods on the shelves and, you know, whether it's the sprays on the crops as well, what are the barriers to stopping that from harming people, and when will that stop harming people?
Are you talking about the use of pesticides?
Yes, sir, and the dyes and the ingredients we can't pronounce in foods.
Well, we're getting, you know, we've already banned 4 dyes, so those are out. And this year we're going to ban the other 5. And we're not, you know, we didn't pass a law banning them. We got the industry to agree to take them out. And if they don't do that, we have a lot of leverage. So all 9 synthetic petroleum-based dyes will be out, I think, by the end of this year.
Thank you.
Secretary Kennedy, Emily Cochran with the New York Times. You're talking about safety for children. Advocates for medical freedom are working in states to not only address phones and some of the other things you've mentioned, but talk about getting rid of vaccine requirements for school entry. Is that something that you support, that you're involved in at this time?
It's not something that I'm involved in on a state basis. Oh, and the federal government recommends vaccines, but we don't mandate them.
Do you want to see more of that, sir? Do you want to see more states take individual action to reduce that barrier?
I mean, I believe in freedom of choice. I think people, I think we have not removed access from any vaccine, and we're not going to do that. If people want to get a vaccine, they can get them and they can get insurance for them. But I think that that's a personal choice that people should make with their physicians and they should make with their families. And, you know, I think that's, we live in America, we signed the Nuremberg Charter, and that requires that freedom of choice when it comes to medical interventions.
Thank you. Hi, Julia Baker with the Tennessee Journal. Question for Secretary Kennedy. There was a bill that just got taken off notice in the State House that would shield the Roundup, producers of Roundup glyphosate from liability. And the MAHA Action Group, you know, took credit for that bill getting taken off notice. Did your office or your initiative have any communication with lawmakers to get that taken off notice?
We haven't had any. We haven't had any interaction with local lawmakers.
One more question right there. Mr. Secretary, my name is Vivian Jones. I'm with the Tennessean. I'm curious, you said earlier that if you want to drink a Coke or eat a Krispy Kreme donut, this is America and you ought to be able to do that. The president often is known for his Coke consumption and eating McDonald's often. I'm curious, have you shared your concerns about the cost of his eating habits?
To no avail.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
The story of Kennedy and Trump has changed the course of history forever. August 23, 2024 will forever be known as the day we turned the corner and took back our great nation and changed the course of history and brought hope to a free world. Join me as we relive the strange relationship between Kennedy and Trump leading to their return to the White House to make America healthy and great again. I spent 2 years following the Kennedy and Trump campaigns. Long before the two men ever considered running for president, Kennedy sued Trump and stopped him from building a golf course near the Hudson River. After Trump won the presidency in 2016, he recruited Kennedy to look into vaccine safety issues. Kennedy was forced out the door after clashing with a man by the name of Anthony Fauci. But the assassination attempt on President Trump's life brought Kennedy and Trump closer than ever. From rivals to collaborators, from foes to friends, this is a story of Kennedy and Trump. You can download the book for free right now by going to kennedy&trump.com. That's kennedy&trump.com. My name is Greg Fernandez Jr. God bless you all.